This page is the front cover, issue 44 of N64 Magazine. Right there at the top it's shouting, Nintendo 64, Game Boy, Pokemon, in big red letters, classic N64 Mag style. The UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag, it proudly claims, and it probably was back then to be fair. Underneath the logo is the website address, www.dailyradar.co.uk, which is a bit of a blast from the past. .u. The main image is proper Bond, Pierce Brosnan as 007, with a gun and that cool, slightly moody look. The big headline screams, Bond's back, and the world is not enough, in massive white letters. First multiplayer shots, it says, which was always exciting for a Bond game back then. Multiplayer GoldenEye was legendary, so this was always going to be compared. Down the side we have latest news on, and then a list of games. First up is Banjo-Tooie. We've played it, with a page number 10, which is always good to see. Banjo-Tooie was massive at the time, everyone was hyped for that one. Then, Sydney 2000, bring home gold for Britain, page 6. The Olympics game. A bit of a cash-in really, but probably fun for a bit. Next, Turok 3 deathmatch details revealed, page 8. Turok was always a bit gory, but the multiplayer deathmatch could be a laugh. At the bottom left it says tipped in yellow, and then Donkey Kong 64. Stuff you weren't supposed to see. Page 86, that sounds intriguing, probably some glitches or secrets they found. Underneath that is Planet Game Boy Plus, with the original and best Game Boy mag inside. And a page number 35. Game Boy stuff was always a nice bonus in N64 mag. There's a little blue box with, look, pointing to another blue banner saying, flip up your free challenge book to see what other stunning games are inside. Freebies were always welcome. Bet that was the perfect dark one. In the bottom right corner, it says August 2000, price £3.25, and issue 44. And there's a little Pokemon Mew info box, talking about it being rare, and a mirage. Typical Pokemon hype back then. Yeah, classic N64 magazine cover, Bond and all the big hitters of the time. Good times. This page is the welcome page for N64 Magazine, issue 44 from August 2000. It's proclaiming itself as Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo mag, which, back in the day, it probably was. The editor, Andrea Ball, in her Just for Mew letter, is banging on about Mew, that elusive 151st Pokemon. Apparently, there was some event at Blue Water Shopping Centre in Kent, where fans queued up to download Mew onto their Game Boys. Crikey, remember those days? She also mentions they've twisted Eurocom's arm to get a first look at their Bond game, The World Is Not Enough, and it's supposed to look stunning with never-before-seen multiplayer shots. We're told to flick to page 28 for that. There are little circles highlighting key features in this issue. Number 10 is Banjo-Tooie, with stunning shots and how it plays. Everyone was hyped for Banjo-Tooie back then. Rareware were gods on the N64. Number 6 is Sydney 2000, the Olympics game. First screens apparently, go for gold. Number 8 is Turok 3, tons of shots of this bloody threequel. Be very afraid. Turok games were always graphically impressive, if a bit samey. Number 49 is Win Mew, again with the Mew craze. Number 28, as mentioned in the letter, is The World Is Not Enough. And number 86 is DK64. Tips. Promising glitches, quirks and hidden secrets. Everyone loved a good cheat back then. It also mentions the next issue is out on Thursday the 3rd of August, and to turn to page 120 to find out why it's going to be fantastic. So, looks like a packed issue with some big hitters in there. This page is the contents page for N64 Magazine, issue 44, August 2000. Right at the top in massive letters it says Contents in a fiery font. It's split into sections, starting with Planet 64 Feet, which kicks off on page 12. There's a news desk section, where you could win a share of 15 grand. Blimey. That was a lot back then. They're teasing, coming soon, on page 18 with some new game shots. Always good to get the early info. Then they've got write-ups on WWF No Mercy, on page 18, THQ's wrestling game that was a proper grappler, backsnapping moves and all that. Mario Tennis is on page 19, showing off new characters and courts, good old sports sim. And Paper Mario is on page 24, hyping up new shots from Mario's GOBS, Macking 2D quest. I remember Paper Mario looking really unique at the time, quite a departure from the usual Mario platformers. Day. Next up is N64 Arena, starting on page 60. That's the section for UK game releases and reviews and all that jazz. Then you've got NBA in the Zone, on page 62, Konami trying to make us feel 10 foot tall, whatever that means, probably a bit of hype for their basketball game. After that, Import Arena on page 66 covers the Japanese and American games, always a treat to see what was coming over. NB, A Courtside 2, featuring Kobe Bryant is there on page 66 as well, boasting about brilliance with baskets and balls. A bit cheesy, but basketball games were getting quite good on the 64. Top Gear Hyperbike is on page 70, asking if it can knock Excitebike to the ground. Bit of a bold claim there. Excitebike 64 was decent. Namco Museum on page 72, saying Pac-Man and his aged cohorts are back, so a collection of the old arcade classics which was always fun for a bit of nostalgia. Space Invaders is on page 73. The coin-op that kicked off gaming is back. Can't argue with Space Invaders, proper classic. And finally, All-Star Baseball 2001 Feet on page 74, acclaims baseball title, calling their players fancy rounders for the 21st century. Bit dramatic for a baseball game. Underneath all that it says regulars with information station on page 26, about the top-selling N64 games, plus a $5 off a game apparently. N64 Magazine issue 45 feet is mentioned for page 120, saying they've got exciting stuff lined up for September. N64 feet on page 122 is apparently about Wanted, Joanna Dark's in big trouble, and then Win New on page 45 in Planet Game Boy, a chance to download the 150 first Pokemon from them. New, of course, everyone wanted New back then, and that's the contents in a nutshell. This page is the contents page for the magazine. In it, right at the front, they're teasing a future look section highlighting some big hitters coming up for the N64. Sydney 2000 is there, which, yeah, the Olympics game, remember that one? Then Turok 3, promising deathmatch and gore, naturally. And Banjo-Tooie, the sequel to Banjo-Kazooie, billed as a beta, cheeky. Then there's N64 Club 64, the reader service bit. How-to guides for Disney's Tarzan and Donkey Kong 64, helpful for the kids I suppose. Club 64 mailbox. Letters page probably. Tips extra for cheats and whatnot, always handy. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, sounds like advice for struggling gamers, a bit of a laugh. Game on challenges, maybe. I'm the best high score listings, bragging right stuff, whatnot. Skill Club 2000, sounds like some sort of platinum league for top players. Directory, game ratings probably. Back issues and subscriptions, self-explanatory. Then they've got features on The World Is Not Enough, the Bond game, with multiplayer shots, very exciting for the time. And another how-to for Perfect Dark, those games were hard as nails, you needed all the help you could get. Finally, Mind Your Language, something to do with Mario and friends in faraway lands, sounds a bit cryptic, maybe a preview or a feature on a new game location. And at the bottom, August 2000, classic N64 days. The next page in this issue of N64 Magazine is titled, Look, and it's all about getting a first glimpse at the big new games coming to the N64. The main headline says your first look at the big new N64 games. First up is Sydney 2000, with the tagline, Go for gold in this new Olympic smash. It gets a score of 6 out of 10. They're saying it's not just your typical button-bashing athletics game like Konami's International Track and Field, apparently it's more about rhythm and timing. Similar to those old Commodore 64 games by Epiax. There's a mention of 12 events including sprint, hurdles, hammer throw, javelin, high jump, triple jump, weightlifting, freestyle swimming, velodrome sprint, skeet shooting and kayak slalom. Visually, they're highlighting how the athletes actually change shape as you train them, and there's a career mode where you start with a team of amateur athletes and try to turn them into Olympic superstars by training them up using treadmills and rowing machines. Sounds like a bit of a grind, to be honest. There are screenshots showing the diving event and the 100-meter sprint, with little captions. One points out the dramatic camera angles, another says the events are like dancing games, and there's a slightly odd one mentioning a dog on a string during the sprint, and noting it's the 100-meter sprint final. Another one mentions a Colin Jackson lookalike leading the hurdles, which, yeah, okay. And there's something about a triple jump camera effect, similar to Bullet Time, from The Matrix. They reckon it could knock International Track and Field off the top spot, which is a big claim. Next is Turok 3, marked as bigger, badder and bloodier than before, and getting an 8 out of 10. Standard stuff for Turok really, just more of the same violent dinosaur hunting. Lastly, Banjo-Tooie is featured with gorgeous shots of Rare's Banjo sequel, and it gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Not surprising, Rare were pretty much printing money with their games back then. Anything Banjo related was bound to be good. There's an INFO burst box for Sydney 2000, with details like, from TBA, cart size, 128 megabits, how many players, 14, Controller pack yes, expansion pack no, rumble pack yes, transfer pack no. Release dates are still TBA for the US, UK and Japan, and the anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 blobs. They also mention the 10 meters platform diving uses a parappa the rapper style control method, which is a bit of an odd comparison for an athletics game. This page is showcasing Sydney 2000, and it's certainly having a bit of a laugh. Looks like they're previewing the game in the future look section, probably a bit early for the actual Olympics hype. They've got screenshots of various events, hurdles, running, weightlifting, even what looks like diving. The captions are a bit cheeky, calling the hurdler Donkey Kong's long-lost cousin, Spanky, and saying, "Don't be afraid of the barriers, they won't bite." Another one mentions, Bob Crimple of the USA discovers the secret of flight for the high jump. They're definitely playing up the arcade-style fun of it, rather than serious simulation. There's a bit about a Spanish offside trap causing chaos in the 1,500 meters, which is a bit of football commentary creeping in, and then talk of line dancing Australian style, which is a bit vague, maybe referring to some kind of race event. They even mention body compression via extremely heavy metal weights for the weightlifting, a bit of typical N64 humor. It all feels very much like a light-hearted look at what to expect. Hopefully it'll be a decent party game when it actually comes out. August 2000, so it's still a bit off yet. This page is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. Right then, Acclaim are at it again, saying it's bloodier than ever. Honestly, every game was bloodier than ever back then, wasn't it? Still, Turok was always a decent dino shooter, and this one, Shadow of Oblivion, looks to be keeping up the tradition. They're showing off some screenshots, mentioning wolf-spider hybrids, which, yeah, sound pretty grim, and headshots are back. Apparently you can blow heads off this time. Cheers, Acclaim, always pushing the boundaries. Deathmatch mode is shaping up well, they say. Remember Deathmatch on the N64? Always a laugh with your mates round. Warranche. The info burst box says it's a 256 megabit cart, which was pretty standard for the time. 1 to 4 players, so good for a bit of multiplayer mayhem. Controller pack, expansion pack and rumble pack all supported. Transfer pack is a no-go though, not like anyone really used that much anyway. American release is set for September 1st, but typical. UK and Japan are just TBA, we always got games later, didn't we? Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 red dots, so they're quite hyped for it. Ailey. They're pointing out you start with just arrows, which is classic Turok, nothing like a bit of primitive weaponry against dinos. They mention monsters from Rage Wars returning, which is alright, Rage Wars wasn't bad. And apparently team attacks work even without the expansion pack, which is a plus. They're also saying the locales are lifelike and Acclaim have done a good job on them. We'll see about that when it comes out, won't we? Still, Turok 3 could be a decent blast when it lands. This page is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, or Turok 3 Shadow of Oblivion as it's actually called. According to this preview, Acclaim's developers might have missed the point of David Dienspier's orders and made it really dark, literally pitch black in places, even needing to crank up the contrast on your telly to see anything. Still, they reckon it's worth it as the levels are much improved and take inspiration from Half-Life, which was all the rage on PC back then. Tolori. Visually, they're banging on about how much harder Turok 3 is trying to be believable compared to the earlier games, with policeman enemies and scientists getting munched by monsters. It's got all the gore you could want, with monsters and humans losing limbs and gushing blood. The cutscenes are apparently a big deal, with proper mouth movements unlike the puppet-like faces in games like Perfect Dark, so they are saying the cutscenes in Turok 3 are better than Perfect Dark in every way, which is a bold claim. There's talk about different enemy types, policemen, scientists, grim soldiers, and locations like military bases, warehouses, and underwater labs. Staying true to Turok, it's apparently very violent, which is hardly a surprise. We're promised messy stains, twitching corpses, and lots of blood. They mention weapons like Fireseed Twins and Cerebral Bore, so it sounds like they're keeping the over-the-top arsenal from Turok 2. There are some screenshots, showing the dark environments and the character models, which look decent enough for the N64, I suppose. One screenshot has a caption saying, "Oops, we did it again, and created a mountain of blood. We feel a bit sick," which is a bit much, isn't it? Another shot mentions acid-chucking chaps, and there's a bit about multiplayer levels being in the works. Finally it says, "To be continued." Keep 'em peeled for more shots of Turok 3 in the very next issue. So, standard preview stuff really, hyping up the game before release. This page is all about Banjo-Tooie, right in the future look section of the magazine. It's got a massive picture of Banjo and Kazooie, taking up most of the page, looking all bright and colourful. There are some screenshots dotted around showing off bits of the game, looks like some watery levels, and Mumbo Jumbo is back, the mad doctor fella. The article talks about how Rare have been busy with Perfect Dark, and now they're cracking on with Banjo's sequel. Apparently the visuals are a big step up, proper crisp and shiny, especially the water environments. They mention Mumbo can now be controlled directly, and he's got some new magic powers to mess about with. Kazooie's got some new moves too, like tucking her head under Banjo's arm for some reason, and spitting eggs, naturally. They are comparing the multi-character thing to Donkey Kong 64, which was a bit of a mixed bag if you remember. Down in the corner, there's an info burst box that gives you the basics. Banjo-Tooie, obviously. It's a 128 megabit cart, so a big one for the time, for 1 to 4 players. Controller pack and transfer pack are a no-go, but it uses the expansion pack and rumble pack. Standard stuff for the N64 by this point really. Release dates are there as well, October for the US, November for us Brits, and Japan is just TBA as usual. And they've given it a full 5 red circles for anticipation, so they're pretty hyped about it then. Classy burden background they reckon in one of the screenshot descriptions, and another one says you can use Mumbo for devious ends, which sounds intriguing, if a bit dramatic. This page is all about Banjo-Tooie, which back in August 2000 we were all gagging for, weren't we? It's part of their future look section, so basically a preview. They're going on about how massive the levels are, showing off a Mayan-themed area, which looked quite snazzy at the time. Apparently Banjo and Kazooie can now swim underwater without needing air, which the magazine reckons is clever. Bit of a dig at science teachers there. There's a section on mastery, talking about new moves. Kazooie can fly, while squatting on eggs to hatch helpful critters. They mention the prehistoric theme with pterodactyls and stegosauruses and even T-Rexes. Sounds a bit mad, doesn't it? They also mention a bizarre football game with molten balls and goals drawn on walls, plus icy mountains in the shape of snowballs, and these weird green and purple monsters carrying a daisy and a sausage, respectively. No clue what that's about, but they find it funny. Fee. Then there's talk about Rare promising better camera control, thank goodness, and using the expansion porg properly. They're raving about the underwater graphics being better than Donkey Kong 64, which is high praise indeed. Apparently Banjo can now store water in his bag, and there's a football minigame in a lava land level. How original. Oh, and you can be a fridge, apparently. Great stuff, they say. They reckon you can use a mirror effect to see Mumbo's bony bonts, whatever that means. The article ends with a to be continued, and a promise of more Banjo-Tooie info in N64 45ths, which I guess was issue 45 of the mag. Standard preview fare really, hyping up what we already knew was going to be brilliant. This page is all about a massive gaming competition called the UK Console Championships. Looks like N64 Magazine are sponsoring the GoldenEye 007-bit, which makes sense. They're looking for Britain's best GoldenEye player, but it's not just Bond, they've got Gran Turismo 2 on the PlayStation and Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast as well. Big prize pot of 15 grand, which was proper money back then. They're holding regional heats in Cardiff, Glasgow, Leeds and London, then the finals at Earl's Court in London. Winner takes home £1,000, and there's dosh for the runners-up too. Not bad for playing video games, eh? Plus, they even mention extra prizes for top girl gamers. Bit of a sign of the times that. Gendered prizes. You had to be at least 15 to enter, and if you were still a nipper under 16 you needed your parents' permission. Website and phone number are there if you fancied your chances. £10 deposit to enter the heats, but you got it back. Picture shows a packed gaming event. Looked pretty exciting to be fair. Bet there were queues for days to play GoldenEye. This page right then, it's all about Nintendo's new console apparently. Fooled you. It's a bit of a wind-up as it turns out it's not a new console at all, but the Pikachu N64, a limited edition version of the Old Faithful. They're saying it's the latest thing out of Nintendo's R&D, which is a bit cheeky, considering it's just an N64 in a fancy dress. They've gone all out with the Pikachu theme though. The casing is different obviously, with Pikachu plastered all over it in solid plastic, striking a pose. The power switch is a Pokeball, and even the reset button is Pikachu's foot. Bit much if you ask me, but kids will probably lap it up. It's supposed to come in 2 color schemes, with blue or orange top panels and a yellow base, to match your bedroom decor apparently. Guaranteed to coordinate, they reckon. It launched in Japan on July 21st, and was supposed to be the same day over in the States, coinciding with the second Pokemon movie, and the release of Pokemon Snap. Remember Pokemon Snap? Bit of a laugh taking photos of Pokemon, wasn't exactly Mario 64 though, was it? And the price? A mere £84.99. Bargain? Not really? Darn bar. There are these little side bits too. Pokelick is about more Pokemon food merchandise, because there wasn't enough already, was there? Flavors like Pikachu and Lickitung, all sprinkled with colourful candies. Sounds a bit sickly to me. Then there's Webvan, about getting games delivered like pizza. Not rental, mind, pity that, but you can specify a 30-minute window. And finally, Poke Your Tongue Out is on about Pokemon bandages from some American medical company. Apparently kids are supposed to want to wound themselves to collect more of these HP up-style bandages. Madness. Down at the bottom there's Dolphin Speak, which is about dev kits, the special hardware and software developers use to make games. They mention the Dolphin, which is the code name for the new Nintendo console, the one that will eventually be the GameCube. They're saying developers are finally getting these kits, using Apple Mac G4s to emulate the Dolphin, and that the RTX graphics chip is finished. So they're starting to get games running on the real Dolphin hardware at last. About time really, we've been waiting for ages to see what Nintendo is going to do next after the N64. This page is all about Pokemon Gold and Silver, well, the next generation, as they're calling it. Remember, Pokemon Stadium had only just come out here, and everyone was still busy catching them all in yellow, so the idea of even more Pokemon was properly exciting. They're saying Pokemon Stadium GS is on the way. That's the Japanese version that we hadn't seen yet, but it was going to have all the new monsters from Gold and Silver, plus all the ones we already knew. Better graphics and a one-player mode too, which would be alright. The Nilva. And get this, they're even talking about a Game Boy Color version called Pokemon Bronze, like a companion to Gold and Silver, in the same way Blue was to Red and Green back in Japan. Bit cheeky calling it Bronze, innit? Gold, Silver, Bronze, Groot. Still, more Pokemon is more Pokemon. There's also a rumor kicking about that there might be a proper Pokemon adventure game for the N64, maybe even Pokemon 3D. They're wondering if it could be a Dolphin game instead, which was the code name for the GameCube back then. Nintendo were good at supporting the N64 even after the GameCube came out though, so who knows? There's a little bit about a Pokemon Fantasy League online thingy, where you could win prizes, even a shopping spree. Sounds like a bit of alright fun if you were into that sort of thing. Warrant? Oh, and on the right-hand side, there's a proper mental Chewits competition. You could win 5,000 gold finger bikes. Remember them? Those little BMX bikes? And 6 bags of Chewits goodies, which includes a rucksack, a picnic mat, a disposable camera, half-price photo processing, and loads of Chewits, even new cherry and mint flavors. Madness. To win, you had to answer what word means the same as chew from oscillate, masticate, or salivate. Masticate, obviously. You had to send your answer to an address in Bath. The first 6 right answers got a plaque. A plaque for chewing sweets and winning finger bikes, blimey. The next page in the mag is all about new Pokemon bits and bobs, and some other bits and pieces. Gear 4 Games are showcasing a bunch of new stuff you could get your hands on, and they've got their phone number there if you want to give them a ring. Remember ringing up shops? Anyway, first up is Pokemon Monopoly. Apparently, Monopoly now exists in every flavor imaginable, and this one lets you play with Clefairy and Blastoise instead of the old boot or car. It's £29.99, which isn't cheap for a board game back then. Then there's Pokemon Chocolate Molds. This is a bit of a weird one. It's a kit to make your own Pokemon-shaped chocolates. Seems a bit fiddly, but kids probably loved it. It was only in Japan apparently, which made it a bit of a novelty. Next up are Pokemon CCG-themed decks. These are for the Pokemon trading card game, obviously. They've got a few different ones like the Bodyguard deck, which is supposed to be tough, and the Lockdown deck for defense. There's also a Team Rocket Trouble deck with dark Pokemon in it. Sounds like they're trying to get you to buy loads of these different decks, naturally. Then we have talking, powered Pokemon. These are little Tommy figures that react when you touch them. They mention Togepi, Mew and Psyduck, and say they spring into action and chat about international politics if you put them near each other, which sounds optimistic. They're £8 each. There's also a perfect dark beer mat. Apparently someone from the magazine saw this beer mat at E3 and tried to nick it. A bit random, but hey, perfect dark was a big deal. Finally, there's Pokemon Scratchies. These are Pokemon scratch card things. They've got themed packs like Tower of Terror and Flame Pokemonathon. You get 8 cards a pack, and they reckon they're better than lottery scratch cards. They're running a competition to win these scratch cards, asking what the art of schmoodling vinyl records is known as. You had to send your answers in on a postcard to N64 Magazine in Bath before the end of July. Good luck with that if you're trying now. This page in Retro World is all about wallowing in nostalgia, hence the title, Wallowing in the Tear-Filled Swamp of Nostalgia. It kicks off with a couple of bits about Pokemon. Pokemon talks about how massive Pokemon is, even back then, with people treating it like a religion. Then Pokemon C mentions Planet PC Magazine, plugging their Pokemon coverage and collectible covers, a bit of cross-promotion there then. Moving down, there's a feature on retro games, starting with Donkey Kong 3 for the NES, Released in 1984, they reckon it wasn't up to scratch compared to the first two Donkey Kong games, especially because Miyamoto wasn't involved apparently, and they replaced Donkey Kong with some bloke called Stanley the Bugman. Bit harsh on Stanley, wasn't he? They mentioned Donkey Kong swinging from vines looking a bit disturbing in the title screen, which is a fair point, I suppose. Next up is Mega Man on the NES from 1988. They say it's a blatant rip-off of Metroid, but with some clever bits and a good main character. Apparently, Capcom created a monster with this game, because it was so popular. They also mention Mega Man 64 on the N64, saying it's more of an RPG than a platformer, but it's good to see Mega Man back. They seem quite positive about Mega Man overall, saying the animation was great and the levels were pretty. There are screenshots from Donkey Kong 3 and Mega Man to show what they're talking about, classic pixelated goodness. At the top there's also pictures of a SNES and an N64 controller, just to set the retro mood, I guess. This page from Planet 64 Mag is all about what's coming soon for the N64. Right at the top it's shouting coming soon, and that they're updating us on the future games. They've got these quick jump to things for different sections, looks like StarCraft 64, Rush 2049, Paper Mario, and something called Ear to the Ground, probably regular features in the magazine. There's a Q&A section, someone's asking about new venues for games, and they're saying SmackDown will be in there, and expect more of those spectacular glamourfests bit dramatic in it. Then someone's on about new wrestlers, and they rattle off a load of names, Tazer, Rikishi, Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle, and the Dudley Boys, all coming to games apparently. They even mention wrestler-specific weapons, and all they know is that Triple H will be able to grab his water bottle. Helpful crowd, eh? Finally in the Q&A, there's rumors about announcers' tables getting smashed up. Classic wrestling stuff. The big article here is about WWF No Mercy, saying, increased slappage. They're raving about the ladder match being in, letting you pummel your foe and climb up for the belt. Sounds like they're adding more to it than just that. You can apparently interfere as a referee, and weapons will be thrown out of the ring. They're even banging on about 80 wrestlers being in it, all with their own signature moves, made by Japanese developers Aki and Asmik, who are proper wrestling fans apparently, so they reckon it'll be spot on. Creator Wrestler is expanded, and there's even some Game Boy Color link-up, whatever that's about. They've messed with the crowd sounds too, making it even more mental. They're clearly excited, saying it'll be the best wrestling game yet. Underneath the article, there's a screenshot of some wrestlers, with captions like, best wrestling game yet, and the people's elbow then. Possibly. Typical magazine hype. Down the bottom left, there's an INFO burst box for WWF No Mercy. It's from THQ, cart size is 128 megabit, 1 to 4 players, no controller or expansion pack needed, rumble and transfer pack are yes. Release dates are autumn for the US, December for the UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 red dots, so they're expecting big things. This is page 18 of N64 Magazine, issue 44. This page is all about Mario Tennis on the N64. It's previewing the game, saying it's coming out in Japan soon and will be here before we know it. They're bigging it up as the best video game tennis title ever, combining the goodness of Super Tennis on the SNES with the Mario world. Sounds alright, doesn't it? Pay game. They're talking about different game modes beyond the usual exhibition and tournament. Like ring mode, which they say is pinched from Mario Golf. And a battle mode. Apparently you can chuck shells and banana skins at your opponent, and even have to volley back piranha plants. Sounds a bit bonkers, but in a good way. Typical Mario, really. The review mentions you can watch replays and study your shots, which is a bit fancy for a tennis game, but fair enough. They reckon the controls are smooth and it's hard to hit it out, which is probably a good thing unless you're after realism, which, let's be honest, nobody is playing Mario Tennis for realism, are they? Blah. There's a Q&A bit where they talk about characters, saying there's 16 in total. Baby Mario is back, and they've got Daisy, Birdo, remember them from Super Mario Land 2 on the Game Boy. And some female Boo character. Apparently you might even be able to download characters for a Game Boy version. Interesting. Gadol. They go into how the characters are different. Waluigi, Luigi's weirdo brother, is quick, but Donkey Kong is strong and can really wallop the ball. Then there's a bit about crazy stuff, saying Bowser's Castle Court moves about and has lava, naturally. They hint at other mad courts hidden in the game too, which sounds like fun. In the screenshots you can see Mario and Toad playing, Baby Mario looking like he's about to lob one, Boo playing Daisy. That's a bit of a strange matchup. There's Birdo with her big beak, Waluigi having a bit of a tumble, and Donkey Kong in the ring mode, Warrington Dorcas. At the bottom there's an info box saying it's from Nintendo, 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, no controller or expansion pack needed, but Rumble and transfer packs are yes. Release date is TBA for the US and UK, but July in Japan. And they've given it a full 5 red blobs for anticipation, so they're clearly well up for it. Seems like it could be a decent laugh for a bit of multiplayer. This page is all about StarCraft 64, which was a pretty big deal back then, bringing proper real-time strategy to the N64. There's a Q&A section at the top where they're asking all the important questions. Apparently there are about 57 missions, which is a decent chunk, and they even bundled in some of the expansion pack missions from the PC version, which is a nice touch. They go on to explain what the missions are like, you know, storming bases, defending your turf, all that RTS good stuff, happening all over the place from planets to deep space. They also introduce the 3 alien races you can play as: Zerg, Terran and Protoss, each with their own style, buildings and units, like any good StarCraft game. They even mention the Terran buildings can move, which is quite unique, and that the Zerg are all about overwhelming numbers. The main article talks about the real-time strategy gameplay in space, praising how well they've managed to get the PC controls onto the N64 pad using the C buttons. They reckon it works surprisingly well after the Command & Conquer games on consoles weren't all that brilliant control-wise, some might say. The visuals are described as a bit blurry at times, but still decent, and the explosions are a highlight. They do say it's pretty violent too, with soldiers and aliens getting shredded, which I suppose was part of the appeal for some. There's also a little info burst table, with the key facts, like it's from Nintendo, supports 1 or 2 players, needs a controller pack and rumble pack, but no expansion or transfer pack. The UK release date was set for October, and they've given it a pretty high anticipation rating, 4 out of 5 red circles. Overall, they seem pretty excited about StarCraft 64, and reckon it'll be a good one to banish the memory of dodgy Command & Conquer console ports. Strong words indeed. This page has a preview of Hercules, the legendary Journeys game for the N64. Seems they're comparing it to Zelda, which is a bit of a stretch, isn't it? They mention you can play as Hercules, Iolaus and Serena, and it's all about stopping Oris. Graphics look a bit blocky, typical for the time, and they're saying it's a 3D scrapper with puzzles, item collecting and action across 12 levels. They're not exactly raving about it, mentioning previous stinkers like Xena and Superman games, which doesn't fill you with confidence, does it? Then we've got a big Pokemon Snap Call Now section. It's basically a price list for loads of games, both N64 and Game Boy. You can see titles like 1080 Snowboarding, Banjo-Kazooie, Castlevania 64, Donkey Kong 64, GoldenEye, Mario Kart 64, all the classics. They've also got Perfect Dark, Pokemon Stadium, and a bunch of Game Boy games like Pokemon Yellow, Donkey Kong Land. Seems like a standard Game Shop advert really, with Call Now and all that. There's also a deal for a Color N64 with Pokemon Stadium or Perfect Dark, which sounds like a decent bundle for the time if you didn't have either of those yet. There's a bit about Pokemon trading cards too, mentioning Series 1 and Series 2, and starter packs and booster packs. Below that, they're flogging other Pokemon bits and bobs like Pikachu reversibles, t-shirts, LCD watches, and minifigures. Standard merchandise stuff. Moving on, there's a Game Boy Color and Pokemon Yellow bundle being advertised, and just the Game Boy Color on its own. Must have been trying to shift those before the Game Boy Advance came out, eh? Bay. After that, it's all the usual accessories, Game Boy bits and bobs, then on to N64 stuff. They've got soft toy Nintendo beanies, those were everywhere back then, a Mad Catz steering wheel for racing games, never really rated those much myself. Rumble packs, obviously essential for feeling anything in games like Star Fox 64. Then your cables, memory cards, and colored N64 controllers. Just the usual bits and pieces you'd expect in a gaming mag. This page features a preview of Rush 2049. It kicks off with a Q&A section addressing some common questions. Apparently, you can muck about with the fog levels, from a bit of mist to proper P-Zuper, and even tweak the gravity, which sounds a bit of alright. They're saying you can customize the cars quite a bit too. Engines, tires, paint jobs, all the usual guff, though they reckon it doesn't actually change the handling much. Speaking of handling, they admit it's a bit dodgy to begin with, you'll be crashing into walls for a while, but you can get the hang of power slides eventually. Good to know they've put reverse back in this time, unlike Rush 2. And stunt tracks are in, apparently 3 of them so far, with pop-out wings to help you fly, which sounds a bit mad. Wow. There are a few screenshots showing off the game. One says, "We can't get over just how good Rush 2049 looks, and it's dead quick too." Which is fair enough, it was shaping up nicely at the time. Another one has a comment about the radar being utterly worthless, which is a bit harsh, but radar in racing games wasn't always the best, was it? They also mention a secret route, which is always good to hear. The main article reckons the tracks are brilliant and sprawling, with loads of variety, from underpasses to lakes. They're banging on about the frame rate being smooth and no fogging issues, which is what you want. It's described as typical Rush gameplay, fast and tricky. They mention the camera needs a bit more work and the split-screen 4-player isn't quite there yet, but overall they seem pretty chuffed with it. There's an info burst box with the tech specs, 128 megabits cart, 1 to 4 players, controller pack, expansion pack and rumble pack compatible but no transfer pack support. Release dates are down as September for the US and October for the UK, and a TBA for Japan. And they've given it a full 5 out of 5 anticipation rating, so they were clearly looking forward to this one. This page is all about upcoming water and driving games for the N64. First up we've got Sea-Doo Hydrocross 2001, which they reckon is trying to take on Wave Race 64. Brave move, as Wave Race was pretty special back in the day. Apparently Sea-Doo's got 8 jet skis compared to Wave Race's 4, and 10 tracks. The graphics are looking decent, especially the water reflections, and they mention interactive course elements, whatever they are. Multiplayer is in 4-player split screen, which is always a good shout. They reckon it's coming out in August, so not too far off. Condor. Then there's Cruisin' Exotica. This is another arcade racer, like Cruisin' USA and Cruisin' World. They're saying it's more of the same over-the-top arcade racing, but with even crazier locations like Atlantis and Mars. They've even toned down the dinosaurs a bit apparently, which might be a relief for some. They mention customizing your cars and even the license plates, which is a bit of fluff really. Handling is described as tight, which could mean anything, let's be honest. Again, August is the month for this one too, so busy times ahead for N64 owners. This page from the magazine Bless It is having a gander at a couple of upcoming titles. First up is Rally Challenge 2000. Right then, so this is from South Peak apparently. Cart size is a decent 128 megabit, and you can have up to 4 players, which is always a laugh. Controller pack, rumble pack, and even transfer pack are all supported, fancy that. Looks like Japan and the US are already playing it, but we're in for a bit of a wait in Blighty. Marked as TBA. The anticipation rating is pretty high though, 4 red blobs out of 5. So someone's keen. The article itself says it's from the chaps who made Multi-Racing Championship, which, let's be honest, wasn't exactly setting the world on fire with only 3 tracks. But they've tripled it to 9 this time, so that's progress, I suppose. They're banging on about licensed vehicles and sponsors like Castrol and Clarion, trying to make it sound all grown up and serious. They're comparing it to Gran Turismo, which is a bit cheeky, isn't it? Other rally games like V-Rally 99, Top Gear Rally 2, and Test Drive Rally are mentioned as competition. Apparently, development shifted from Genki to Shikat last December, whoever they are. There's a mention of snow on the tracks and screenshots showing some rally action. Seems alright if you're into that sort of thing. Then there's Paper Mario. Now this one is from Nintendo themselves, a smaller 64 megabit cart, just a single player job, but it supports the controller and rumble packs, but no expansion pack. Oddly, we're getting it in October apparently, while Japan and the US get it in autumn. Again, a high anticipation rating, JJJ. They're calling it an RPG/platform hybrid. It's set in the Star Kingdom where Bowser, that old menace, has nicked the Star Stick. Magic Koopa from Yoshi's Island is in on it too. Apparently Mario is still knackered from the SNES Super Mario RPG days and needs to train up, like some sort of Rocky Balboa thing, with Bowser's Koopa troops helping him out. Bit of a strange analogy if you ask me. More news from Star Kingdom in a couple of months, they say. Warring 2. Screenshots show the Paper Mario style, Peach getting kidnapped as usual, and some Goombas looking a bit grumpy. There's a bit about RPG-style fighting being like Super Mario RPG, turn-based with timing-based attacks. And apparently it was meant to be out in December, but they pushed it forward to October because of the Christmas release rush. Which makes sense, I suppose. This page is all about a preview for Batman of the Future on the N64, based on the cartoon. Looks like Looking Glass Studios, who were doing mini races, are the developers, though it mentions they've gone under, so perhaps that's not so good for this game. It's shaping up to be a 3D side-scrolling beat-em-up, pitting you against loads of Joker goons. Apparently at E3 the playable version was a bit restricted to just moving and punching clowns, but they reckon Batman's suit will spice things up with powers and gadgets. There are a few screenshots showing the gameplay. It's got that 2.5D look, like those fighting games were doing back then. One of the captions jokes about Batman climbing on scenery to get an advantage, and another comments on a rocket launcher being a bit unfair. There's a Q&A section too, discussing what weapons Batman will have, like bow staffs and nunchucks, and whether they'll actually be any different from just punching. They also mention the suit will let you turn invisible and super strong, probably through power-ups. The game's supposed to be set across 4 different worlds, though the final level is the big showdown. The developer is Kemco. Apparently they did Daikatana and Top Gear Hyperbike. Hardly inspiring choices if you ask me. The info burst box says it's a 128 megabit cartridge, 1 player only. Controller and rumble packs are supported, but no expansion or transfer packs. Looks like an October release in the US, but TBA for us Brits and Japan. Anticipation rating is a couple of red dots, so not exactly setting the world on fire. Also, there's a quick mention of Custom Robo 2 being in the works in Japan. And get this, Midway are working on Ready to Rumble Round 2, which will have Shaquille O'Neal and Michael Jackson as boxers. Michael Jackson in a boxing game? Right then. This page is a special investigation, all about the upcoming N64 game of The World Is Not Enough. Seems James Bond is back, and they're calling this his most ambitious adventure to date. Eurocom, the developers, are mentioned, and apparently they surprised everyone by revealing it back in April. They're using something called the Tyne engine, and it sounds like they're really trying to take on GoldenEye. Bit cheeky, but we'll see. Quarantined. The article mentions they've remained pretty faithful to the film, which is probably a good thing. There's talk about sabotage and speedboat sections being key parts, with screenshots showing just that. Looks alright, I suppose. In the info box, it's got the usual details. 256 meg cart size, which is decent. 1 to 4 players, which is always good for multiplayer. Controller pack, expansion pack, and rumble pack are all supported, as expected. Transfer pack is a no. Doesn't surprise me for a Bond game. Release date is set for November in the US and UK, and Japan's TBA. Anticipation rating is 4 red blobs out of 5, so they're pretty hyped for it. Warringto. There's also a little box saying, N64's special investigations can take us all over the world, but apparently they only had to go to Derby to see Twine at Eurocom's headquarters. Not exactly jet-setting, is it? Still, could be a decent Bond game if they pull it off. This page is all about The World Is Not Enough on the N64. Right in the middle, there's a massive UGH in big red letters, which is a bit harsh, isn't it? But looking closer, it's actually a special investigation feature. The big bloke with the gun is Pierce Brosnan, who was Bond at the time, naturally. They're showing off screenshots from the game, pointing out things like real-time shadows on MI6 floors, which back then was a bit of a wow moment, even if it looks a bit blocky now. Another bit mentions, Twine's guards make a real meal of dying. Show-offs with a picture of a guard dramatically falling over. They were always a bit theatrical in those games, weren't they? There's talk about Bond's watch takes another guard by surprise, showing night vision and a meaty sniper rifle. They're getting quite excited about the auto-aim too, saying clearing crowds is a cinch in agent mode, thanks to the useful auto-aim. Handy for us, less skilled players back in the day, I suppose. Nonto Hassan. Down at the bottom they've got little sections for different aspects of the game. Skiing is mentioned, with a snowy screenshot, saying it's breathlessly exciting slalom, and faultlessly recreated in the game. Sneaking talks about night vision goggles, for sneaking onto a plane in Kazakhstan. Stars name drops Pierce Brosnan, Robbie Coltrane, Denise Richards, Sophie Marceau, and even Goldie. A bit of celebrity spotting there. Lastly, shooting mentions there are loads of weapons and stomach-turning enemy death routines. Sounds a bit much, but that was the style at the time, I guess. Overall, it's a preview piece, trying to build hype for The World Is Not Enough. Looks alright for the time, even if we've seen a fair bit better since then, eh? This page is all about The World Is Not Enough on the N64. Looks like a mission briefing in the magazine. It's titled MI6 in Action, and sets the scene by saying Bond's back at MI6 in London after some Swiss bank shenanigans, and things are about to go wrong. It starts with tip number 1, saying MI6 is under attack, and there are guards on hand to help. Then, tip 2 explains that the doors are locked down, but the enemy is smashing through windows, proper SAS style. Tip 3 mentions abseiling through the roof, and swapping your PP9 for rifles that dead bad guys have dropped. Number 4 talks about another death trap, sprinklers suddenly going off in the MI6 corridors because of a fire, but they don't know where it is yet. Burialist. Tip 5 says M gives Bond a new objective, to find Sir Robert King as you stumble into her office. Then, tip 6 warns about terrorists with sentry guns in the corridor, and suggests a swift bullet to the brain to stop them. Number 7 reveals the sprinklers were rigged with a bomb. Tip 8 says Sir Robert got caught in the explosion, and his dying message suggests Eurocom is still up to no good. Tip 9 mentions the TNT culprit, Cigar Girl, is escaping along the River Thames. Finally, Tip 10 says to hop in the elevator to Q's lab for a speedboat chase. There's also a little box out to the side called boom boxes, talking about how guns are not just for making geysers of blood from guards, but also for blowing up bits of scenery in The World Is Not Enough, just like in GoldenEye. It says you can shoot monitors in the reception to make them fall down amidst explosions to create damaging blasts. Classic GoldenEye, very good that. This page is all about T-Bwine, which I reckon is The World Is Not Enough on the N64. Right then, trigger happy is the headline, and it's a preview of the weapons you'll be getting your hands on as Bond. They're banging on about over 20 weapons in the game, each with 2 functions, which sounds like a bit of alright. They kick off with the Raptor Magnum, a meaty pistol, laser-sighted. They say it's slow to reload but a guaranteed kill. Then there's the Taser, which is cufflinks that zap people, a bit of fun for disabling guards. Following that, the silenced PP9, handy for sneaking about in Kazakhstan apparently. They point out you can even use your punch. Seems Bond's been brushing up on his fisticuffs since GoldenEye. Next up is the sniper rifle. For those long-distance shots, watch the blood spray, they say. Lovely. And lastly, the automatic shotgun, a double-barreled beast that scatters shots, inaccurate at range but deadly up close, and a satisfying clunk-click reload apparently. They also mention Q and John Cleese, saying they've rustled up all manner of gadgets for Bond: card keys, data grabbers, night vision goggles, and even an X-ray scanner, a bit like that bit in the film, borrowed from the movie they say. Bond's watch has a grappling hook, cutting laser and tranquilizer darts, all to get you out of sticky situations mid-game. There's a help me section as well, saying Twine has a hefty supporting cast. Apparently, MI6 guards help you in battle by alerting you to events and offering solutions. Roles can change throughout the game. M hands out mission objectives at MI6 HQ, but you have to save someone from terrorists in Istanbul, where Zuvovsky will lend you bodyguards if you sweet-talk him. Sounds a bit convoluted, but maybe it'll make sense when you actually play it. Oh, and there's a bit at the top about killing a guard at the top of some stairs and he'll tumble all the way down. Being framed, eat your heart out, they joke. And a note about the claustrophobic underground level with working trains, and Robbie Coltrane is apparently rendered perfectly, complete with rifle, and an unconvincing Russian accent, bit cheeky, and one of the guns is apparently really loud, a monster they say. Right then, weapons and gadgets galore for this Bond game, seems like they're packing it all in. This page is all about The World Is Not Enough on the N64, Eurocom's take on the Bond license. They're really pushing the boat out, saying you get to see the world, and fair enough, the locations do sound varied. Istanbul, London Underground, even a submarine under the Bosphorus, they've crammed a lot in there. They're banging on about how detailed and smooth it all looks, and from the screenshots, it's not bad for the N64, certainly better than some of the early blurry messes we saw. Apparently the multiplayer is a laugh, even in an unfinished state, which is always good to hear. They're making a big deal about the scale of the levels, saying you can go from an Azerbaijani forest to an airstrip stretching for miles. Sounds a bit like they're trying to outdo GoldenEye, which, let's be honest, was the benchmark for any Bond game back then, and pretty much any console shooter for that matter. The reviewer is saying it's not the most original game in the world, calling it a shameless copy of GoldenEye, but then immediately backtracks and says that's a good thing. Bit of a mixed message there in it. They reckon it's set to offer shooting thrills on par with GoldenEye, which is a bold claim. They're going on about the destructive environments and intelligent guards, all the usual guff you'd expect. They mention the film people gave the developers blueprints and photos to make the levels authentic. Istanbul rooftops, Spanish banks, even the Millennium Dome in London is in there. And apparently in one level, you can turn a corner and find a full-size nuclear submarine, as big as the train level in GoldenEye, always with the GoldenEye comparisons. Still, it sounds like they're trying to capture that same sprawling, impressive level design, which is what everyone wanted after GoldenEye blew us all away. So yeah, The World Is Not Enough. It was trying to be the next big Bond game on the N64, riding on the coattails of GoldenEye, but we were all hoping it could live up to the hype. This page is all about the multiplayer in The World Is Not Enough on the N64, not to be confused with that Bond game on the PlayStation, completely different games you see. It's called The Multiplayers at the top, bit of a silly title, in it. They are saying deathmatch is a long way off, but it's still good, boyzoo. First up, characters. Apparently, all the characters from the single-player game are in multiplayer, looking all polygonal and that, with all the usual gasps and yells. Eurocom, who made the game, are planning appearances by a few special guest stars, whatever that means. Then there's parachutes. This is a bit different. When you die, you parachute back in, and weapons and ammo fall with you. Sounds like a bit of a mad scramble for gear. They call it brilliantly unique. A bit strong, but okay. Levels next, saying there are about 15 levels, taken from the single-player missions. Snowy slopes, London streets, Istanbul buildings, and even a hedge maze are mentioned. They are calling the hedge maze claustrophobic, which is probably right. Weapons section says if you played Perfect Dark, you'll be right at home with the weapons in this. Dual function guns, like in Perfect Dark, meaning you have to choose the right weapon for the job. They like the guided missile launcher, calling it like PD's Slayer. PD is Perfect Dark, by the way, for those who are not in the know. Shooting is up next, saying like GoldenEye you can rely on auto-aim or switch to manual. Headshots are better than limb shots, torso hits are somewhere in between. Sounds about right. Radar. Each player gets their own radar, which you can switch off in the pre-game menu if you want to handicap yourself or something. They say it's GoldenEye style, so it'll probably be a green dot thing. Mastery section talks about the AI in the levels. They say the enemies aren't stupid, crouching, jumping and setting up sentry guns. They lure you into their trap. Dramatic stuff. Animation is between GoldenEye and Perfect Dark quality, which is a good thing. Eye candy bit at the end says GoldenEye didn't bother with eye candy, but Twine is full of it. Speedboats, helicopters, trains, snowmobiles, all that kind of thing. They ask, immersive? Yes, indeed. Well, I suppose so, Maris. And finally, don't mention the war. It talks about the faces of Brosnan, Carlyle, and the rest being digitized from real articles, whatever that means. Eurocom has used impersonators for voices, apart from John Cleese, who plays Q's assistant and is using his own voice. What a star! Yeah, alright. Overall, it sounds like they are pretty positive about the multiplayer in The World Is Not Enough, comparing it favorably to GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, which is high praise for an N64 shooter back then. A bit hyped up, as you'd expect from a magazine, but it does sound like it could be a laugh with a few mates. This page is all about Perfect Dark. Good lord, what a game that was back in the day. Headline screams, How to Become Perfect at Perfect Dark, and it's by a chap called Alan Madrell. They're saying, Perfect Agent difficulty is a right pain. But not to worry, they're here to help. What we said section reminds us, they reviewed it in issue 42, and gave it a stonking 96%. They reckoned if you could only have one N64 game, Perfect Dark was it, no contest. Bit strong perhaps, but it was a looker, I'll give them that. Run to know. The article itself talks about how GoldenEye was great, but to really test yourself you needed to tackle Perfect Agent on Perfect Dark. They mention remembering the difficulty, and how it was rare at their peak with these complex missions. Says charging in all guns blazing won't cut it, you need cunning and guile. They also reckon the single-player missions are top tier, and will haunt you to your grave, which is a bit much, isn't it? But yeah, it was intense. They're going to take you through Perfect Agent, even though the easier difficulties are a bit of a walk in the park. Welcome to an epic journey, they say. Dramatic as ever. Below that, there's a screenshot of a very empty-looking corridor in the game, and a little caption saying, a nice, empty corridor. Couldn't be any trouble lurking there, eh? Sarcasm, obviously. Good times. This page is a guide for Datadyne Central, Defection, which I reckon is from Perfect Dark, that classic rareware shooter. It's a walkthrough for what they're calling a tricky bit. They're talking about security cameras and guards, classic stealth stuff from back then. Step 1 is about spotting cameras from the helipad and a lone guard, nothing too taxing. Step 2 gets into disabling cameras in a room. They mention an ECM mine, which is handy for those security hubs. Step 3 is about going down a stairwell and dealing with any guards, then buzzing into Cassandra's office for her necklace key. Sneaky stuff. They warn about Cassandra alerting security if you're not quick enough. Step 4 is more stairs and facing armed guards but mentioning a secret door, typical level design of the time, always hidden bits to find. Then there's the hardest bit section, which is about the bottom floor lift area. Apparently loads of guards come out and you're meant to use your laptop as a sentry gun, chuck it down the stairs to deal with the riffraff. Ammo might be tight afterwards, they say. Step 5 is about clearing an area after a phone conversation, and dealing with a chap who needs a good knockout before he wipes data from a computer. Sounds like some office espionage going on. Finally, step 6 is more action in a lift area, lobbing the laptop again as a sentry, and searching for another secret door to the external comms hub. All standard stuff for a sneaky shooter back then. GoldenEye got a mention, which makes sense given how much Perfect Dark was its spiritual successor, but bigger and better in pretty much every way, even if it did melt your N64 if you used the expansion pack. Good times. This page is all about Perfect Dark, Rare's spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007, and blimey, what a game it was. It's giving some general tips for players under the heading Shooting Star. Basic stuff really, telling you not to be a bullet sponge, use cover, listen out for audio cues, and search for secrets. Obvious stuff, but always worth remembering in Perfect Dark, as it wasn't exactly a walk in the park on higher difficulties. It also reminds you to use the secondary functions of weapons like the CMP-150, and special weapons like the Avenger and laptop gun. Good point about not standing still near sentry guns, instant death that was. And yet guards were a nuisance, ducking and rolling all over the place. Wasting ammo on them was a rookie mistake. It also points out that dropping their gun doesn't always mean they're dead, sneaky blighters. Focusing fire on one enemy at a time is solid advice, and controlling bursts with automatic weapons was key, otherwise you'd run out of ammo in seconds. Finally, reload before entering a new area, a golden rule in any shooter, really. Boch. Then there's Hush, It's a Secret, hinting at using explosives to blow up a pipe in the internal comms level near Cassandra's office. Sounds like a bit of a hidden path. And it mentions the laptop gun being in a locked room after you grab the programmer. The page also mentions a guard in the office next to the programmer who's carrying 2 silenced falcons. Bit of a treat that was Biri, those falcons. Jarti. Call My Agent section talks about the differences on agent difficulty. No laptop gun, more cameras and more ammo. Standard difficulty bump stuff really, making it tougher for those who thought they were too clever for the game. Lastly, Speedy Little Cheater gives tips for getting under 130 on the level to unlock the Marquess of Queensberry rules cheat. Basically, cheat to get a cheat. Classic gaming logic. The tips are all about speedrunning really. Jump off ramps, only shoot guards that get in your way, quickly take out Cassandra, go down the stairs and into the lift, shoot guards in the lift for ammo, shoot through the lift glass to the lower level, and use the CMP-150 secondary function in the hub room. If you still have legs after all that, then leg it. Pretty much telling you to rush through the level as fast as possible, no messing about. There's a little don't miss box mentioning the lift ride having a tantalizing glimpse of the Datadyne building and raving about counter-operative mode, claiming it's possibly the best shootout in video gaming history. Bit strong maybe, but it was pretty good fun playing Coop back then. This page then is all about getting through the Datadyne research level in GoldenEye 007. Right on, who hasn't spent hours on GoldenEye back in the day? It's a proper walkthrough, breaking it down step by step. They kick things off telling you to go left, follow a droid, sneaky stuff like that, reprogramming droids and all. Then it's about the caution door, using the cam spy gadget, remember that thing? To snap a picture of a bizarre isotope. Sounds a bit made up if you ask me, but it's GoldenEye, innit? Warrington door. Next they're talking floor hatches, weapons testing areas. Bit convoluted, but that's the level design for you. Shoot a guard, nick an experimental shooter, typical Bond stuff. Then it's labs, night vision goggles, and you've got to watch out for scientists setting off alarms, the pesky blighters. Advanced shield is mentioned, and then of course, the sentry guns. They've even got a section called the hardest bit, dedicated to those. GoldenEye sentry guns, they were a pain in the backside, weren't they? Apparently, use the Avengers threat detector and duck back. Sound advice probably. Page 38 of N64 Magazine, issue 44, so this is proper old school now. Good times. This page is all about becoming a proper Perfect Dark agent, and not just scraping by. It starts with Speedy Little Cheater, which is giving you the lowdown on getting the pugilist buddy. Apparently you need to blitz through the second level on Perfect Agent in under 6.5 minutes, which sounds like a right pain, but for a buddy, maybe worth it? The tips are all about the maintenance area, silver doors, and shooting glass panes standard. Perfect Dark stuff really. Then there's Listen Very Carefully. And they're banging on about headphones. Remember those days when people actually cared about game audio? They're saying it's crucial in Perfect Dark, especially to hear alarms and enemy chatter. Subtitles are mentioned as a rubbish alternative if you don't want to wake the family, which is fair enough. Hush, It's a Secret is where they get into the proper sneaky stuff. Proximity mines near isotopes. Cheeky. More ammo in labs naturally. Apparently you can disarm guards with a Falcon pistol, which is a bit of alright, but they're telling you not to try that at home, funny lads. Sneaking into maintenance shafts, shooting glass barriers, all classic Perfect Dark level design. They mention CMP-150s and night vision goggles. There's a bit about using a red computer to open a floor hatch for a weapon cache. Sounds like a decent find. Finally, Call My Agent talks about the difficulty levels. Apparently the easier modes are a bit jimped, with labs being closed and less shielding, which seems a bit tight-fisted. Fewer sentry guns on Agent and Special Agent though, so swings and roundabouts. And apparently, the scientists are less uppity if you're not on the hardest settings, probably less shouting about experiments being shut down. There's a don't miss bit that just tells you to enjoy the weapons test section and have a go at shooting the maintenance robots. Apparently it's like living out your Star Wars droid fantasies. Alright, bit dramatic, but each to their own. Overall, it's a page packed with tips for Perfect Dark fans, focusing on speed, stealth, and making the most of the game's sound and secrets. Standard guide fare for the time, really. This page is a How-To Club 64 inches feature, and this time it's all about getting through the Datadyne Central extraction level in GoldenEye 007. It's a walkthrough, see, giving you a step-by-step guide to navigate the level, especially on Perfect Agent mode where the lights are off for a minute at the start, cheeky blighters. It tells you to creep around with your night vision goggles and Falcon, picking off guards and heading for the left lift. It goes on to say you'll need to use your knowledge from the first mission to get past a barrier, finding a false wall or door thing. Then it talks about dispatching guards to get Cassandra's office key, although apparently, it's not actually necessary, but there's a surprise if you go through the door anyway. Sounds ominous. Next, it suggests going up the stairwell and picking up a rocket launcher to deal with a helicopter, saying it's tough even with conventional weapons, swearingly tough no less. Then it's up another stairwell to the left of the lifts, where the game takes over for a cutscene in a mini-hub, telling you to shoot a guard and flick the lights on to stun the other guards. Finally, it mentions the helipad for the escape cutscene, and talks about Dr. Carroll, warning about the Natalia syndrome, where he can get in the way and die easily, meaning mission failure. It says to leave him to his own devices really, as he's supposedly smart enough to look after himself if he's still alive by then. Good luck with that, mate. This page is all about getting better at Perfect Dark, which, let's be honest, was the game everyone was playing back then. It starts off with some general tips in a section called Going So Soon, about getting through levels quicker. Apparently sidestepping makes Joanna Dark and Bond move faster, which is a bit of a weird one, but there you go. It also mentions learning guard behavior, and level objectives to unlock cheats, which was standard stuff really, and a GoldenEye trick about getting guards to open doors by shooting with a noisy gun, classic. Preets. Then there's You Little Cheater, which is all about cheats, naturally. It says if you complete the level you get a rocket launcher, always handy. And if you complete agent mode in under 2:03 you get hurricane fists, which sounds a bit bonkers, flying fists like Bruce Lee, alright? The guide then goes through a quick run-through of a level, mentioning using night vision goggles, getting into a second lift, dealing with bodyguards only when necessary, grabbing the rocket launcher, and taking out guards with a CMP-150. Fairly straightforward stuff for anyone who's played it a bit. Retin Core, HUSH, IT Secret, tells you how to find a secret area on the 21st floor. You need Cassandra's office key, then on her desk there's a grenade to use in the corner, and you find yourself in a secret area with a dragon weapon at the foot of a ladder. Apparently this only works on Agent and Special Agent difficulty, which is a bit annoying if you're playing on lower difficulties. Call My Agent is about how agent mode is easier, not just because of the difficulty, but because of extra stuff you get. Apparently it's easier to reach higher areas, no locked lifts, and no helicopter needed, and you even get spare rockets. It finishes off with a tip about headshotting the first 5 guards to get a DY-357 Magnum from the last one, who's hiding behind a sofa. Good to know if you want a Magnum. Finally, there's a don't miss bit reminding you about those crazy ladies you meet later in the level, with their questionable fashion sense. It suggests a shotgun for dealing with them, and blasting holes in the building. Sounds like a typical day in Perfect Dark, to be honest. All in all, just your usual tips and tricks page for Perfect Dark, reminding you how good it was, and probably still is. This page is the front cover of issue 19 of Game Boy Planet magazine, dated August 2000. It's all about Pokemon fever really, with a massive picture of Mew smack bang in the middle, and the headline screaming about winning the rarest Pokemon. Seems they were giving away Mew, which back then was a massive deal. Everyone wanted to get their hands on one, especially before they started giving them away at every other event years later. There's a film strip down the side showing scenes from the first Pokemon movie, you know, the one where Pikachu cries. Heartbreaking stuff for a kid. It also mentions they're reviewing Puchikarat on page 51, sounds like a puzzle game where you steal clothes and win gems, a bit odd. And Moomin's Tale on page 53, which is about a hipper-like creature, and a granny with a bad memory. Seems like a platformer maybe? They are also giving away Lara Croft gear, Exploder cheat cartridges, and GB Essentials, whatever they are, in a competition. And tucked at the bottom it mentions Pokemon, the first movie, import DVD news, Pokemon tips and cheats, so a decent bit of Pokemon stuff in this issue it seems. Typical for the time, everyone was mad for Pokemon back then. This page is all about the future of the Game Boy, specifically how it's going to link up with the Nintendo's next home console, which at this point they're still calling Dolphin. It's quite exciting stuff thinking back, proper next-gen buzz. The main article is titled A Link to the Future, which is a bit of a play on Zelda of course, and it's talking about how the Game Boy Advance will be able to connect to the Dolphin using the transfer pack. Apparently, at the moment, only Pokemon and Mario Golf are using the transfer pack on the N64, but they're hoping for more, mentioning Perfect Dark, Mario Tennis, and even a WWF game. Remember Perfect Dark on the Game Boy Color? Blimey, that was a tough game for such a small screen. They're teasing some upcoming Game Boy Advance titles, and the screenshots are really interesting. There's one of Snake from Metal Gear Solid. Looks like the Game Boy Color version, but they reckon there might be a Game Boy Advance version coming too, tied into Metal Gear Solid 2. Sons of Liberty on the PlayStation 2 and presumably Dolphin. Imagine Metal Gear Solid on the Game Boy Advance, that would have been something else at the time, proper stealth on the go. Then there's talk of a dual Dolphin/Game Boy Advance version of Resident Evil. Now that's a thought. Resident Evil on a handheld, survival horror shocks on the move as they put it. They mention a canned Game Boy Color version of the first Resi, wondering if it will resurface on the new hardware. That would have been intense on a small screen. Finally, they touch upon Sega's Sakura Taisen, a Dreamcast RPG, which was rumored for Game Boy Advance. They seem a bit doubtful about that one though, saying some rumors are just too wild to believe. Yeah, looking back, that one never happened, did it? The editor, Martin Kitts, is banging on about his Pocket Pikachu dying, bless him. Says it went to the Great Battery Farm in the sky, after 1,000,000 steps and 4,755 hours. Bit dramatic, isn't he? Still, Pocket Pikachu, what a craze that was. Everyone had one clipped to their jeans. Simpler times. This page features a couple of competitions and articles, classic magazine fodder back in the day. At the top there's an article called The Dark Side, about cheat devices, specifically the Blaze Exploder for the Game Boy. It's talking about using cheats in games, especially for Pokemon, and how this thing can give you access to loads of codes, even to get Mew. They pose the question, do cheats ever prosper? With a bit of a cheeky yes or no, but they can have as many Mews as they want, kind of answer. They're giving away 10 of these Exploders, which, to be fair, for £25 back then, wasn't cheap. It's mentioned that there are millions of codes online you could use with it. Below that, there's a competition to win Tomb Raider stuff. It's for the Game Boy Color version of Tomb Raider, which they apparently gave a decent 4 stars to. You could win a copy of the game, a Lara Croft watch, t-shirt, keyring, and a Tomb Raider record bag. They even chuck in a Snakelight and Tomb Raider cart, which sounds like a bit of a random collection if you ask me. There's also a riddle asking, on which game system did Lara Croft make her debut? With PlayStation, Saturn and PC as options. Cheshire. Then there's Yellow Peril, which is about Game Boy accessories. It's all about the Gamester Essentials pack, kitted out in yellow to match your Pokemon Yellow game cartridge. It's got a power pack, mains adapter and a wallet, and costs £9.99. They are giving away 10 of these too. The competition question is a bit odd, asking, which of the following Euro popsters annoyed us the most? With Kraftwerk, the Scatman and Yellow as choices. Bit of a strange question for a games magazine, but hey-ho, it's all a bit of fun, isn't it? This page is all about the mythical Pokemon Mew making an appearance in, of all places, Kent. Seems a bit random, doesn't it? But back then, Nintendo were pushing Pokemon hard. This article is about an event at Blue Water Shopping Centre, which they're calling the UK's prettiest shopping centre. Bit of a stretch if you ask me, though I suppose it was fairly new at the time. Anyway, it's all about getting Mew in your Pokemon Red, Blue, or Yellow game. Apparently Mew was this super secret 151st Pokemon, powerful psychic type, and you couldn't just catch it in the games normally. You had to go to special events like this one, and use these Mew machines, which sound quite the contraption. They only had 10 of these machines in the whole world apparently, making Mew even rarer. The article describes this event, saying they thought no one would turn up as Greenhive, Kent was a bit deserted, but then they saw the queues at Blue Water. Loads of kids, and probably some slightly tooled blokes pretending to take their younger siblings, all lining up to download Mew. They even had Nintendo reps there to help people with the downloading process. Imagine that, needing help to press a button on a SNES pad. They mentioned there were 9 Mew machines inside this purple structure, which they've cheekily renamed Mew Water for the event. They even say Charmander was there, describing it as a hideous fire-breathing monster, with a pot belly and a big nose. Charming. Looks more like a friendly, slightly dodgy mascot to me. Seems like it was a big success. All these kids got their Mew, and probably bragged about it relentlessly at school the next week. Good times. Simple times. This page, titled Pokefolk, is all about the Mew event down in Kent. It's like they sent a reporter to check out the queues and chat to the Pokemon trainers, eager to get their hands on Mew. Looks like they interviewed a few lads, Tim and his mates, and Ian and Ali, Tim got there proper early at 7:45 AM, bless him. They're all buzzing about how many Pokemon they've collected, some of them have got loads. It's mentioned that one of the lads has a Pokemon collection cart for his mum, which is quite sweet actually. Warrington Norsa. For anyone who missed the Kent event, don't worry, Nintendo were touring the Mew machines around the country, hitting locations across the UK and even Ireland in July and August. So plenty more chances to snag a Mew. They even had a Pikachu mascot there to keep the queue entertained, which stretched all the way back to Blue Water Car Park, can you believe it? There were thousands of Mews being downloaded, and apparently loads of Pokemon trades and card battles happening in the queue. It sounds like a proper social event. And check this out, there's a competition to win your very own Mew. All you have to do is answer a ridiculously simple question. Which Pokemon is a genetically modified clone of Little Mew? It's Mewtwo, come on now, anyone who played Pokemon Red or Blue knows that. Then you just need to write in 25 words or less why you deserve Mew, and send it to N64 Magazine in Bath. Good luck to anyone who entered. Mew was the must-have Pokemon back then, everyone wanted one. This page showcases previews of some upcoming Game Boy Color games. First up we've got Daikatana, remember that one? It was supposed to be the Mutts Nuts on PC and N64, but turned out to be a bit of a damp squib, didn't it? Anyway, they're doing a Game Boy Color version which is apparently an action-adventure, a bit Zelda, and a bit Turok apparently. The reviewer reckons it's a million miles away from the original concept graphically, which is hardly surprising on the old Game Boy Color, is it? They mention time travel and different zones and weapons, all to recover the Daikatana sword itself. Sounds alright for a handheld I suppose, out in September. Next we have Mega Man X, now that's more like it. Capcom superhero on the Game Boy. They're saying it's more like the SNES games rather than the NES ones, which is good news. Lots of weapons and stealing upgrades from bosses. Classic Mega Man really. They even mention getting a mech suit early on, sounds a bit bonkers. Out in October this one. Biat. Finally there's Tweety's high-flying adventure. Blimey, talk about going from one extreme to another. Apparently Tweety has to collect 80 feline paw prints, all to save the children's park from Colonel Rimfire. Sounds a bit daft to be honest. Looney Tunes characters are in it. Lola Bunny, Taz, Marvin the Martian, the usual suspects. They even mention Tweety getting eaten by Sylvester. Charming. Also out in September apparently, if you're into that sort of thing. This page is a review section, with a couple of games under the spotlight. First up it's Pucci Karat, sounds a bit fancy doesn't it? It's from Taito, and they're charging £25 for it, which was standard price back then. Apparently it's a mix of Buster Move and Breakout, which is an odd combo if you ask me, but the reviewer seems to think it works alright. You're hitting gems with a paddle to make chains and beat these, cute anime characters. They reckon it's got a lot of luck involved. They gave it a solid 4 stars, so not bad, huck involved. Then there's Pro Pool from Codemasters, also £25. This one is more straightforward, it's a pool game. They're making a Color of Money reference, showing their age a bit there. Says it's pretty easy to get into, even if you're not a pool shark, and compares it to Virtual Pool on the N64, which was decent enough. They mention various game types, like 9-ball and 3-ball, and even UK rules, for those who know what they are. They reckon it's good for friendly matches against the computer, and gave this one 4 stars as well. So both games are getting a respectable nod from the mag. This page is a review of 2 Game Boy Color games. First up is UEFA 2000. Looking at the screenshots, it's proper old school footy on the handheld, like what we were used to back in the day. Bit like Sensible Soccer but squintier. The reviewer mentions it's similar to an earlier game called Ronaldo v Football, and reckons it's alright as long as you don't expect silky skills like Zidane. They say it's a decent enough football game for the Game Boy, but Total Soccer is still king. They've given it a 3 out of 5 star rating. Then there's Wacky Races, based on the cartoon. This looks like a budget racer, bit like a simplified Mario Kart but with Penelope Pitstop and Dick Dastardly. The reviewer says it's a Wacky Races variation on the usual driving theme, and the weapons are easy to use. They reckon it's alright fun for the combat mode but nothing special, especially since there's no 2-player mode and not enough cars on screen. Bit of a shame really, could have been a laugh. It also gets a 3 out of 5 stars. Seems like a couple of solid but unspectacular games for the Game Boy Color then, nothing to write home about, but probably alright for a bit of portable gaming on the bus. This page features a couple of Game Boy reviews, starting with Moomin's Tale. Blimey, Moomin's on the Game Boy. Based on the Finnish kids' stories apparently, and they reckon it's surprisingly good. They even joke about calling Moomin Hippolax if Nintendo made it. A bit of a cheeky Pokemon dig there. It sounds like your typical collectathon with mazes, puzzles, and even a track and field style button bashing section. Graphics are bold and colourful they say, and it gets challenging enough to keep older gamers interested, even if you might be a bit embarrassed to be seen playing a Moomin game. They do suggest hiding your Game Boy in a brown paper bag if you are playing it, which is a bit harsh, but you get their point. Warrant? Then we have Oddworld 2 on the Game Boy. Remember the first Oddworld game? That only got 1 star in the very first issue of the magazine, if you can believe it. Well, this sequel gets a whole 2 stars. They say it's got some more races of aliens and the levels look a bit better, but the same gameplay flaws are still there, including those very sensitive controls where Abe takes a massive step with just a tap of the D-pad. Abe's vocabulary is still limited to the same old phrases too. Maybe fans of the PlayStation Oddworld games would like it more, but it didn't do much for the reviewer, scoring a measly 2 out of 5. They do joke to get off him, Abe, and say, all that fellow wants is a friend. Sounds a bit rubbish, to be honest. This page is all about the Pokemon movie on DVD, proper big news back then as DVDs were still a bit fancy. It's in the home movie section, naturally. They're banging on about the Don't Say You Love Me music video by M2M. Yeah, that sugary pop tune that was inescapable back then. Apparently it's on the DVD along with the film. Seems like they're quite impressed with the DVD extras. There's an audio commentary with the director and producer blabbing about the movie, script changes, and how different the Japanese and US versions are. Apparently they toned down some of the darker bits for the US, and changed the sound effects, especially in the big battle scene, because the original shrieks were deemed too much for a family flick. Can't have the kids too upset now, can we? Gah. They also mention you can skip straight to the good bits, which is always handy. Overall, they're calling it a top quality package, which I guess for a Pokemon movie on DVD back then it probably was. It was supposed to be out in the UK by the end of the year, so this is a proper heads up for Christmas list material for the young'uns. This page of the magazine is all about the upcoming Pokemon movie, Pokemon 2000. It's really hyping it up as the next big thing, and rightly so. Pokemon was absolutely massive back then. First up, they're having a look back at Ash's journey, reminding everyone of the very first episode of the cartoon, you know, the one where Ash is late and ends up stuck with Pikachu, that stubborn little fella who wouldn't go in his Pokeball. It's described as the start of a beautiful friendship, all bless. It's over in a minute apparently. Quick recap for the newbies, I suppose. Then there's Mewtwo's origin, digging into the backstory of Mewtwo. Apparently, this short segment shows a group of explorers stumbling upon some ruins and finding fossilized Mew hair. Bit dodgy if you ask me, messing with genetics like that, and they even show a shadowy Mew watching them. They really should have paid more attention, eh? Next up is Pikachu's Vacation, which they call the warm-up act for the main movie. It's described as a charming cartoon showcasing Pokemon in their natural habitat. They mention Marill's aquatic skills, and Charizard causing chaos with a pipe. Sounds like typical Pokemon hijinks, to be fair. Always good for a bit of light entertainment before the main event. They even sneak in a mention of gold and silver monsters, teasing what's to come in the movie and those new games everyone was gagging for. Togepi gets upset at Psyduck apparently, the usual Pokemon squabbles. There's a little section on a free Mew card, which is a limited edition promo card to go with the movie. Basic Mewtwo with a promo stamp. They say it's highly desirable for card traders. I remember those days, everyone's scrambling for the limited edition stuff. Good times. Finally, they get to the main event, Pokemon 2000. It's coming to US cinemas in July, lucky Yanks getting it first as usual. They're banging on about all the gold and silver Pokemon featuring in it, a preview of what's coming in the new games, in October. It's supposed to introduce these new creatures to the American audience before the games even come out. They're showing a screenshot of Bellossom and Ash and Pikachu riding Lugia, that legendary Pokemon. Very exciting stuff at the time. They'll have to wait until next Easter to see it over here. Typical. All in all, it's pure Pokemon hype, setting the stage for the movie release and the gold and silver games later in the year. This page is dedicated to Pokemon, proper old school Game Boy stuff this. We're talking Pokemon Yellow, Red and Blue here. Warrington Dorcas. First up, it's all about getting a surfing Pikachu in Pokemon Yellow. Apparently, someone at the magazine dropped the ball last month and forgot to tell us how. Bit of a sorry, not sorry tone there, blaming Neil or someone. Anyway, the guide itself is about battling through the Pokemon Stadium Prime Cup Master Ball, using your Game Boy team, Pikachu included of course, and making sure he's a decent level. No continues allowed apparently, that's cheating. Win the whole thing and bam, surfing Pikachu. Then you head to Fuchsia City Beach and have a chat with some bloke in a hut to get to the surfing minigame. Classic stuff. Me. Then it's on to Red and Blue with a bunch of tips and glitches. Cutting grass is mentioned. They seem baffled why you'd want to do that, other than for bushes. A Safari Zone trick is there too, using an escape rope to find monsters without wasting Safari balls. Cheeky. There's a fishing glitch about standing next to statues, sounds a bit daft. The Celadon glitch about an invisible PC in the hotel, I remember that one, everyone knew about that. A tree glitch is mentioned too, chopping down a tree and reloading to stand on top of it. Typical glitchy fun. And finally, the Cinnabar glitch where an old man ends up on the gym roof if you surf to the beach in a specific way. These old games, eh? Full of oddities, but that's part of the charm, innit? Sorry, nearly slipped up there. The next page is a right blast from the past, packed with tips and cheat codes, just like we used to love back in the day. It kicks off with asteroids, reminding us how to make the game a bit easier with the cheat and X code, or go properly invincible if you fancy it. Then there's a bit about other codes, including one called QREATR which gets you the Excalibur craft. Sounds a bit tasty, doesn't it? Goo goo. Next up is Metal Gear Solid. It talks about a sound test mode, and a level select option which is handy if you didn't want to play through the whole thing again to get to your favorite bit. Taliga. Worms Armageddon gets a look in with a table of level codes: alien, cheese, computer, construction, Egyptian, fruit, garden, hell, jungle, medical, pirate, snow, tools and treehouse. So loads of different landscapes to mess about in with your worms. Good times. Duke Nukem 0 Hour is next, with invincibility and level select codes, classic stuff. And there's a little tip about finding a machine gun on level 14 by jumping on a sloping platform. Typical Duke Nukem silliness. Then we get to the high score tables. Pokemon Pinball is first, with top scores for red and blue tables. Looks like Zamir Bandali and Sweeling Cow were dominating that game. Mario Deluxe Challenge and Super Player scores are there too, with James Holt and Joseph Kaiser leading the pack. Tetris DX gets a mention with 40 lines, ultra and marathon scores. Seems Alan McMenigal was a Tetris master back then. Finally, Game & Watch Gallery 3 scores are in, covering Mario Bros, Egg and Turtle Bridge. And at the bottom, there's a call out for more high scores to be sent in to Planet Game Boy at the N64 Magazine address, or by email, for all you modern types. All pretty standard stuff for a tips page, but good for a quick cheat, or to see if you made the high score grade. This page showcases the Game Boy gallery from the magazine, and it's a right laugh, innit? It seems folks were sending in their snaps taken with the Game Boy camera, that quirky little add-on for the Game Boy. Remember that? Black and white, low resolution, pure madness. The winner this month is someone called Ruben Lodge from London, who recreated a monster from that cheesy 80s sci-fi film Extro. Apparently his version is better than the original, which is saying something. Probably not much though, knowing Extro. Yemen. T.O. Then we have a load of reader submissions. There's Keith Mortimer showing off his Aussie disguise, which is just a dodgy face to be honest. Andrew Hyland from Accrington sent in something called Squinty Alien Action. Michael Hyland, also from Accrington, sent in another one. Are they related, or is Accrington just a hotbed of Game Boy camera weirdness? Charlie Clark from Driffield sent in Siamese twins. Eskil Vestra from Norway did something called Land of the Long Ball, sounds a bit dodgy. Scott Houston from Company. Antrim sent in a picture labelled Freeake, and another one called The Lumpen Creation. Dave Fryer from Seaton reckons he's captured the dark side of Jigglypuff. Crikey. G. Stokes from Sutton Coldfield sent in a picture with "Cool" written on it, and the magazine is asking if that's his real name. Trevor Ryan sent in something they can't even figure out what it is. Yeah. Then there's a half dog half will picture from Jurgen Marlowe, some mutant cats from Justin Calderon, a bald head and Game Boy camera combo from Callum Andrews, a rather grim, horrible to contemplate picture from Daniel Micklewright, Catherine Rock professing her love for Mew, and finally Leo Urbanski sent in a monster behind bars. Chris Bartlett from Kent sent in an alien sighting Roswell via the M25 apparently. The magazine reckons these pictures reveal the weirdness of everyday folk, comparing it to that John Carpenter film, They Live. They're asking for more submissions, promising Game Boy Power Packs and wallets as prizes, and they're telling people to send their pictures to an address in Bath every month, only in the pages of N64 Magazine. Madness. Pure madness. This page is the cover of N64 Arena Magazine, issue 44. Big and bold, it's shouting about NBA Arena in the Zone. Seems like they're reviewing NBA Courtside 2 featuring Kobe Bryant. Boom shakalak, they've put, which is trying a bit too hard to be cool, isn't it? Wondering if it's actually any good, or if it'll just end up in the bin. There's a bit for Import Arena too, reminding folks to check out games from America and Japan, which was always interesting to see what we were missing out on. Down the bottom they've got smaller bits for other games. Top Gear Hyperbike asking bikes, mud, roads, fun? Always loved Top Gear games back in the day. Remember the SNES one? Was a right laugh. Then Namco Museum, promising a trip down memory lane, which is always good for a bit of retro gaming. Space Invaders is there too. Watch the skies. Again, how alt? Can't go wrong with a bit of classic alien blasting. And lastly, All-Star Baseball 2001, with the tagline, Field of Dreams. Each of these has a go-to page number so you can flick through and read more. Page 62 for NBA, 66 for Courtside 2, 70 for Top Gear, 72 for Namco, 73 for Space Invaders, and 74 for Baseball. Right then, let's see what they thought of these games. This page in N64 Magazine is breaking down how they review games, a kind of how it works for the readers. Right at the top, there's an info burst section for a game they're calling Metroid 64, developed by Nintendo, 256 megabit cartridge, for 1 to 4 players. It's listing the release dates as April in the US, May for us here in the UK, and way off in November for Japan, and a cost of £40, which was a fair bit back then. They're ticking boxes for controller pack and rumble pack support, standard bits at the time. Foray. Then there are sections for pluses and minuses, fairly self-explanatory, and if you like this, which is doing game comparisons. They're oddly saying if you enjoyed GoldenEye or Turok 2, you might also like Mickey Mouse 64 inches made by Rare. Apparently it got a 96% score in issue 45, which seems a bit wild. They're calling it an amazing Mario beating Mickey Mouseathon. Bit of a strange comparison, to be honest. They're dividing up the review scores into visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict, each with a score out of 10 given to Mickey Mouse 64, and the overall verdict is 90%. Then they go through what the scores actually mean, from Star Game, for 85% and above, down to Disaster Zone, for anything below 19%. At the bottom, there's a Team 64 inches feature, with photos of the reviewers, names like Andrea Ball, Justin Webb, Mark Green, Dark Mark, Martin Kitts, Paul Edwards, Alan Madrell, Steve Jaleem, and even Mew. Bit of a mixed bunch of names there. They've got Game of the Month awards for titles like TG Hyperbike, Namco Museum, Space Invaders the Classic, NBA Courtside 2, ASB 2001, and Moomin's Tale. A real variety of games being highlighted. This page features a look at NBA In the Zone 2000 for the N64. It's part of a previously an N64 segment, so it seems like they've been covering this game before. They're talking about the game's formation options, saying it's quite detailed, almost like an American football game in its depth, which is a bit much perhaps for a basketball game. They do mention that in practice, all these planned formations go out the window when the game gets going, which is probably true in the heat of the moment. There's a bit about exhibition mode, which sounds fairly standard, allowing you to pick any team combo. Then there's a section on dunking, saying it should be satisfying, but the button combos are a bit much. They do mention a dunk contest mode, including reverse mid-air catches and power pause dunks, which sounds like it could be a laugh. In the info burst box, we've got the details. Konami are the developers. It's on a 128 megabit cart, supports 14 players, uses 123 pages on a controller pack. Blimey, that's a lot. Cartridge save is out, password save is out, expansion packed and transfer packed are out, but rumble packed is in, naturally. It was already out in the US and UK at the time, and coming soon to Japan, priced at £50. Seems a bit steep for what is likely another fairly standard basketball game, to be honest. They also have little captions under some screenshots like it's all about give and take basketball, and properly implementing the formations is quite taxing, which is a bit of an understatement by the sound of it. Another one says, before the big push it seems so small and so far away, don't you think, under a dunking screenshot, and our man has elected to swing about like a dappy simian on the hoop. Bit harsh, that last one. Overall, it looks like your typical basketball game. Nothing groundbreaking, but probably solid enough if you're a fan of the sport. This page of the magazine is reviewing NBA In the Zone 2000 for the N64. It looks like they're not overly impressed, to be honest. The reviewer is saying it's a bit chaotic visually, and the animations are jerky, which isn't great, is it? They mention the replays are satisfying, but highlight the dodgy animation even more. There's a bit about the ball sticking to players, which is a classic arcadey thing, but maybe not what you want in a realistic basketball game. They've got screenshots showing the starting lineups for Utah, with the likes of Russell, Malone and Stockton, proper legends of the game back then. Then there's a section on foul play, talking about the million ways to get a foul in basketball, which is probably true in real life and in this game, by the sounds of it. They mention backcourt violations and defense fouls, typical basketball rules. They're having a dig at the AI for being a bit too keen on fouls, perhaps. There's a bit called Statty, which mentions the controller pack being needed to save progress, and Stats, which is standard N64 stuff, always needing those memory packs. They're making a point about all the stats in the game, individual player stats, season trends, All the usual sports game data. They sound a bit sarcastic about it all, saying it's exciting for sports statistics fans. Yeah, right. Yeah. Finally, in the visuals box they say it's less fuzzy than previous games, but the animation is still weak, and players are lurching around. They sum it up by saying it's more about frantic button bashing in matches. Sounds like a bit of a mixed bag really, not a must-have game then, more of a rental perhaps. This page is all about NBA Courtside 2 on the N64, a game that was trying to cash in on the basketball craze at the time. They're banging on about Michael Jordan being in it, even though he'd supposedly retired and come back and retired again. Bit of a drama queen Jordan, wasn't he? Apparently they're saying you should be grateful just to play as Shaq, Stockton and Kobe, which is a bit cheeky, considering they are hardly unknowns. They reckon the player models in the game look alright in the small preview pics, but in the actual game, they just look like generic blokes from some youth club. Maybe a bit harsh, but you get the idea. There's a section on the shootout mode, comparing it to that Eakins Hoop Hurl minigame from Pokemon Stadium, which is a fair point actually, they are quite similar in concept. Then they're raving about the dunk contest, which sounds like it's trying to be a bit more over-the-top stunt-like, which could be a laugh. Looking at the screenshots, there's one where it's 5 players against 1. Bit unfair, isn't it? Another one shows the shootout mode screen, with players like Brown, Fox, Murray, and Bullard listed. There's a dunk shot captured, and a shot of the team selection screen, Lakers versus Kings. Classic stuff. They even show the edit player screen, so you can mess about with stats, and a shot of a foul being called in-game. The captions are a bit of fun. 5-on-1? Hardly seems fair to us. Lovely job. We'll buy you a pint later, governor. Typical British humour there. Yeah. Okay, whatever you say, ref. You'll get yours. Fruity yeah. Every gamer has been there with dodgy referees. Kakor. They mention you can trade players in the game and mess with team lineups, which was always good for customizing things. They also make a joke about the controls being confusing. Like American football, footy fever has found its way to the States, that sort of thing. And a cheeky comment saying they'd never heard of the Kings and the Suns, on the team select page. Overall, it seems like they're cautiously optimistic about NBA Courtside 2, highlighting the dunk contest as a bit of a standout feature amidst the usual basketball gameplay. This page features a review of NBA in the Zone 2000 on the N64. It's all about playoffs, seasons, and player trades. The reviewer reckons the micromanagement fun is where it's at. You can tinker with the player appearances to your heart's content, even turn a big lad into a skinny beanpole, which is a bit bonkers if you ask me, but there you go. Socks and arm bandages too if that's your thing. They've got screenshots showing the game in action, courts looking fairly detailed for the time, and the player edit screens so you can faff about with your team. One bit is called the holy hole, referring to the basket. Bit of a strange comment about human heads. Typical N64 mag humor, I suppose. The review mentions pluses and minuses, good points being, it looks better than previous games, loads of options, and good multiplayer. Downsides are the character animation being a bit duff, and it's hard to get through the defense, calling it a bit dull overall. They compare it to NBA Courtside 2, featuring Kobe Bryant, and reckon if you like that you might like this. Duff. The reviewer's verdict is it's competent but not amazing, giving it a score of 69%. Lifespan gets an 8, visuals a 6, sounds a 6, and mastery a 5. Sounds about right for a decent but not groundbreaking sports title back then. They mention instant replay and the controls not being the most intuitive. Alan Madrell is the reviewer, if anyone remembers him. August 2000, seems like ages ago now. This page in Import Arena is taking a look at games from overseas, in this case NBA Courtside 2 featuring Kobe Bryant. They're banging on about how easy it is to score, especially if you imagine you're Shaquille O'Neal, 7 foot tall and all that. Apparently 212 points is just an average score in this game, which sounds about right for these arcadey basketball titles. They reckon defending is much harder than scoring, which is probably true, mimicking real basketball in a funny way. The reviewer is making jokes about getting your head stuck in the hoop, and reckons Kobe Bryant is the main man, doing all sorts of fancy 360 dribble moves. Proper top stuff apparently. They are comparing his basketball skills to Michael Owen's footy skills, which is a bit of a stretch, but okay. They are saying you should draft Kobe into your team, if you want to show off. Lawa. In the info burst box, it says it's from Nintendo, a 128 megabit cart, supports up to 4 players, and uses the controller pack for saves, but not the cartridge save, password save, expansion or transfer packs. Rumble pack is in though, naturally. It's already out in the US but we're still waiting for it in the UK and Japan, no dates given yet, just TBA. Price is about $50, or 35 quid, which seems about the going rate for imports back then. This page is all about NBA Courtside 2, another basketball game on the N64 it seems. They're calling it featuring Kobe Bryant, right there on the cover. Looks like they reckon it's a winner with Super Kobe Slam Dunks another winner being the headline. The review starts off saying it's been a while since the original NBA Courtside, back in issue 18, and apparently, no other basketball game has come close since then. That's a pretty bold claim. They mention it was made by Left Field, the people behind the original. They're saying it's a bit of a pain to get hold of in the UK, something about NTSC N64s, and needing a converter card if you've got a PL machine, which most of us Brits do. Still, they reckon it's worth the effort, calling it the world's finest basketball game right here, right now. Quite the statement. There's a section on new faces, which talks about facial animation, saying it's all the rage, like in Conquer and Turok 3. Apparently NBA Courtside 2 got there first though. They're making a bit of a fuss about players pulling funny faces when they're about to dunk, saying it's realistic because NBA players gurn for the cameras in real life. Alright if you say so, cuckoo. Then there's a bit called Showing Off, about a new practice mode, where you can play like the Harlem Globetrotters without another team on court. Sounds a bit daft, but maybe fun for a laugh. They also mention Star Game Time, where players dive around like footballers, and there's Power Dunk Mode too for even more craziness. Oh, and judging by that expression, he's about to be very antisocial. Air freshener, quick! They're captioning one of the screenshots of a player with a funny face. A bit silly, but it's N64 Magazine, what do you expect? And another caption, Rocket Man arrives from the stratosphere, trailing smoke. They're definitely having a bit of fun with this one. In basketball terminology, that's called throwing one down. Cool. Right then. All in all, sounds like they're quite impressed with NBA Courtside 2, even if it's a pain to get hold of over here. Seems like it's got some daft modes to keep you entertained. This page showcases the new features in NBA Courtside 2 on the N64. It seems like they're trying to get us excited about this basketball game. Heika. First up is the three-point contest, based on the NBA All-Star Weekend. Apparently this was a big deal for basketball games back then. You get 60 seconds to shoot 25 long shots, with money balls counting double. Sounds like a bit of arcade fun, doesn't it? Then there's Career Mode, where you create a rookie player and try to win experience points. It mentions doing things like scoring hoops, grabbing rebounds, and getting assists to improve your stats and hopefully make it to the playoffs. Standard career mode stuff really, nothing too groundbreaking. Animations are highlighted next. Apparently players have signature moves, but they're so subtle you'd only notice if you're a real NBA fanatic. Bit of a waste of effort if you ask me. Get a new. Free throws get a mention, with a new system where you position a marker in a colored area. Sounds slightly more involved than just button mashing, which is probably a good thing. Momentum is another new feature. Apparently, if you play well, you get the crowd on your side, and the momentum bar shifts in your favor. This is supposed to improve your accuracy and give you unlimited turbo. Sounds like a bit of a gimmick, but could be fun. Rue. Lastly, replays are now in from a special camera angle after you score. They've even got slow-motion instant replays to admire your dunks. Always good to have a decent replay system, especially for showing off to your mates. The Play the Import section mentions that NBA Courtside 2 isn't scheduled for a UK release, but we can play it on a PL machine with a converter cart. They even tested it with an N64 passport converter and said it worked fine, apart from the screen being slightly off-center. They mention you can get it from importers like CA Games or online. Remember those days of importing games? Seems a bit of a faff now, doesn't it? Polite. They also mention the graphics are much the same as the last game, which isn't a bad thing apparently. They say Left Field, the developers, have given the courts a fresh lick of paint and added freaky expressions to the players' faces. Animation is good, and players react to the ball, unlike some other basketball game this month, whoever that could be. And they finish by saying better teams will thrash you if you're not careful. So, all in all, seems like a decent update to NBA Courtside, nothing revolutionary, but some nice additions. This page is a review of NBA Courtside 2 for the N64, and blimey, they're giving it an 87%, which is pretty decent. Right at the top it's called Import Arena, so this must have been before it came out in the UK, or maybe it was just the US version they got their hands on early. They're banging on about the pluses and minuses, highlighting silky animation, easy arcade mode, lots of depth, and varied dunks as good points. Then the minuses are no Toon 2 mode and no PAL version, which is a bit of a pain for us in Blighty back then if you wanted it to run properly on your telly. There's a section called Sonic Boom Boys, which is about the new arcade mode, It seems to have these over-the-top moves like super dunks that create shockwaves, smoking momentum where you leave trails of smoke, hotspots for extra points when you're playing well, and ultra dunks which they reckon are unstoppable. Sounds a bit mental, like NBA Jam on steroids, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, mind you. They're also talking about the visuals and sounds being good, and reckon it's got great mastery and lifespan. They're comparing it to NBA Jam 2000, and saying it's a more detailed basketball sim with Toon 2 arcade action all in one, which is a fair point. The screenshots look alright, bit blocky as you'd expect for the N64, but the courts are shiny apparently. Warrentel, the verdict is, the world's best basketball game, which is a bold claim. They seem a bit miffed about the lack of a PAL version though, typical. Overall, sounds like a decent basketball game if you were into that sort of thing back then. 87% is a good score, so it must be doing something right. This page is all about Top Gear Hyperbike. It's making a bit of a splash, comparing itself to Bike Sim Central, wondering how it measures up. Looks like they are focusing on resolution in one section, mentioning the trusty expansion pack, and how it bumps the resolution from a blurry 320 by 240 to a much crisper 640 by 240. Which was a big deal back then for making things look less blocky on your telly. They're banging on about the track editor being better than Excitebike's. Apparently it's quite simple to use. Start with a loop, add checkpoints, and then you can twist it about with the analog stick to make the track shape you want. Sounds alright, I guess, being able to make your own tracks. They even show some basic track designs they've knocked up. One of the captions is a bit cheeky, saying it's brown, isn't it? Probably referring to the track color in the screenshot. On the left, there's an info burst bit. Kemco are the developers. It's a 96 megabit cart, 1 or 2 players, and it needs 35 pages on your controller pack. Blimey, that's a fair chunk. Cartridge save is ticked yes, but password and expansion pack save are crossed out, and rumble pack is a yes, transfer pack is a no. Release date wise, it's out now in the US, but TBA for the UK and Japan, which was typical back then. US always got it first. Cost is $50, about 35 quid. Standard N64 price really. This page is a feature called Ride On, about the game Top Gear Hyperbike for the N64. It's breaking down what you get in the game. First up, it talks about dirt bikes, saying you get chunky bikes for off-road courses, mentioning their tires are good for powering through mud, supposedly like in real life. Then there's road bikes, the street-legal racing bikes. Apparently they're as fast as the dirt bikes, which is a bit daft really, maybe they just kept it simple. Next, stunts, which uses a 1080-degree snowboarding-style trick system for stunts. Sounds a bit like a marketing buzzword from back then, doesn't it? Birds is an odd one. It says if you win a championship you get new bikes, a trophy, and a personal dance from a young polygonal lady. Right, okay then. They say it's important to have incentive in racing games. Each to their own, I suppose. Lifespan section says the game aims to be easy, you don't even fall off much. It talks about nitro boost icons, checkpoints, and how computer bikers are efficient at grabbing nitro. It mentions stunts, and breakable barriers on courses. There's a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are, it's fast, you get 2 types of bike and a decent course editor. Minuses are, some of the courses are rubbish, it's not as smooth as Excitebike, and they reckon Excitebike is 10 times better. Bit harsh maybe? If you like this, Bit recommends Excitebike 64, calling it the best bike game around, with perfect handling and ingenious tracks. Excitebike 64 was pretty good to be fair. Then they've got these rating categories. Visuals crisp in highs but not as smooth as it should be. Sounds, the most annoying engine whine ever created. Ouch. Mastery, not quite up to the standard of latest N64 games. Lifespan 2-player mode and track editor are decent little extras. Finally, the verdict box says Top Gear Hyperbike is above average, but there's only one choice if you want to race bikes on the N64. They give it a score of 64%. Not bad, not amazing. Seems like they think Excitebike 64 is still king of the hill when it comes to N64 bike games. Fair enough, really. This page is an Import Arena review of Namco Museum 64. They're calling it Golden Oldies or a load of old rubbish. It's a collection of 6 of Namco's arcade classics, aiming for nostalgia, you know, like those, now that's what I call 80s, CDs. They've got info bursts on the side, saying it's 128 megabit cart size, 1 or 2 players, needs 8 pages on the controller pack and no cartridge save, password save, expansion pack or rumble pack and transfer pack. Basically bog standard cartridge. The review reckons the conversions are near perfect, proper arcade stuff, warm-up screens and DIP switches, and saves high scores, which is good. But then they moan that standard telescreens make perfect conversions impossible. Bit of a downer that. If you like Donkey Kong 64, they say you might like this. Bit of a stretch, isn't it? Donkey Kong 64 was pretty cutting edge for the N64, and these are proper old school games. Visually they say it's identical to the original 80s coin-ops, therefore rubbish bit harsh. Sounds are spot on, all the blips and bleeps. Mastery is about using the analog stick being handy, and Lifespan reckons all 6 games are classic. The verdict is, 6 near-faultless conversions, but 1 for teary-eyed nostalgics only, and they give it 70%. Ouch. Mark Green wrote it. They've got little boxes with comments all over the screenshots. Dig Dug is probably the worst of the bunch, but still top. Another one says, nice of them to line up so neatly, over a Galaga screenshot. Not an uncommon pole position sight. Slap some lippy on Pac-Man and what do you get? And for Galaga, the Phoenix-like aliens in Galaga possess a powerful tractor beam attack. Pole position, with its crucifying speeds and hairpin bends, is a nightmare. Famously, Pac-Man packs up after the 99th level. They're basically saying it's alright if you're ancient and remember these from the arcades, but probably not for the young'uns. Fair enough, I suppose. This page is a review of Space Invaders for the N64. Remember Space Invaders? Proper old school, that is. Apparently they gave it a bit of a preview back in issue 41 of N64 Mag. Looking at the pluses and minuses box, it seems they think it's a decent retro update, and like the power-up system and controls, but reckon it's a bit of an eyesore. The bosses are a letdown and it gets repetitive, which, to be fair, the original kind of did after a while, didn't it? If you're into this sort of thing, they suggest Lode Runner 64, which got 70% in issue 29, said it was a good update of the old Commodore 64 classic. Visuals are apparently a bit dodgy, and the explosions are cheap, which is never good. Sounds are okay, apart from missing that floor-shuddering throb of the old arcade, which is a bit of a shame as that was part of the charm. Mastery is hilariously called the most technically impressive game of 1978. Bit of a dig there, cheeky. Lifespan, they reckon it's gripping at first, but you'll get bored after 50 levels. Sounds about right for this type of game. Verdict is a solid 73%, saying it's a nicely tweaked version of the original to make it feel fresh, and they call it nice. Yeah, nice, high praise indeed. Info Burst box tells us it's from Activision, 128 megabits cart, 1 player, needs 2 pages on the controller pack, no other save options, and no expansion or rumble pack needed. It was out in the US already, but still, TBA for us, and Japan at the time. Cost about $50, so around 35 quid. TA. Then there's a bit about Save the Earth, with sections on the weapons. Lime pummelers are your standard missiles. Missiles are slow homing ones. Laser beam is a big blue laser that wipes out vertical columns, and boomerang shot goes around the screen but takes its time. All sounds like standard power-up fare, really. This page is a review of All-Star Baseball 2001 on the N64 from Acclaim. It seems they're saying that after a few previous versions, ASB 99 and ASB 2000, you'd never guess they'd do another one. Bit sarcastic already? 1. The reviewer seems impressed with the graphics, mentioning detailed stadiums, and even the players' handlebar mustaches being beautifully modeled, which is something you'd notice back then as attention to detail was a big deal in the N64 era. They point out the camera angles during intro sequences and the shadows in the game, which is fair enough. These things were getting better on the N64 at this point. Techie. Gameplay-wise, they say it's a simplified version of batting and fielding, maybe making it a bit more accessible than some of the really hardcore baseball sims. They do mention it might become repetitive with endless pitches, which is a fair point. Baseball can be like that sometimes even in real life. There's an info burst box that gives us the details. It's a 96 megabit cartridge, supports 1 to 4 players, and needs 121 pages on a controller pack for saves. Looks like it has cartridge save and rumble pack support, but no password save, expansion pack or transfer pack. It was out in the US and Japan then, but not in the UK at the time of writing. Cost was about $50, roughly £35 back then. They reckon it's got 700 plus players, all with properly modeled handlebar mustaches. They keep going on about that. Seems they think this version is better for casual players than the super hardcore baseball games, suggesting it's more arcade-like, which probably means easier to pick up and play. Overall, sounds like a decent baseball game for the N64, if you were into that sort of thing back then. This page is a review for All-Star Baseball 2001 on the N64. It's quite a detailed look, talking about how they've tried to make the game more realistic with things like player streaks affecting performance, a bit like WWF Attitude, which was a laugh at the time. They mention Cooperstown, which is good for the baseball buffs, and they've got all the official licenses, which is always a bonus. The pluses and minuses box points out the good stuff. The all-star players and settings are top-notch, and it looks pretty decent, blimmin' gorgeous they say, bit strong maybe. They reckon there's a lot of depth to it, On the downside, they say to avoid the simplified mode, the computer fielders are too good, and it's maybe a bit too similar to previous versions. There's a section comparing it to All-Star Baseball 2000, saying it's more of the same but you might find it cheaper, which is fair enough. Then they break it down with ratings for visuals, sounds, mastery, and lifespan. Visuals get a 9, sounds get a 5, tinny American rock music they're calling it, and a strange umpire. Mastery gets a 7, lifespan an 8, saying you'll be playing it until 2002 if you get into it. The verdict is positive, calling it good-looking, smart, and it handles well, like a fine wine improving with age. But they do say it's for hardcore fanatics only. It gets an overall score of 81%. They mention the batting practice and home run derby modes, which are good for lazy summer days, and they have a little moan about dodgy refereeing decisions from older games still creeping in. Alan Madrell wrote the review, and it's from August 2000, issue number 75. Good score 81%, must be alright if you are really into your baseball games. This page from Club 64 is the section where they give you the lowdown on all things N64. It's August 2000, and the main game they're highlighting is Disney's Tarzan. Big picture of Tarzan himself, looking a bit beefy if you ask me, and a jaguar. They're promising 4 pages of tips to help you rule the treetops. Looking at the rest, there's the Club 64 mailbox, where you could apparently win a prize for writing in. Then there's how to be king of the swingers in Disney's Tarzan, naturally, given it's the main feature. Right next to that is how to see things you shouldn't in Donkey Kong 64. Sounds intriguing, maybe some glitches or secrets they're gonna reveal. Tips Extra is next. Always a handy section for general game knowledge. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is there. Remember that? Bit of a weird one, but always had some strange gaming ailments supposedly cured. This time it's about a Mario malady, a blast core bunion and more. All cured. Sounds like they're on about injuries caused by playing games for too long, a bit dramatic, but alright. Game On is a challenge section. Think you're good? Then try these challenges. Classic stuff. I'm the best is a reader feature. Who is? Maybe you, maybe not. Check it out. Standard reader submission section. Skill Millennium. Getting busier every month, can you make the grade? Sounds like a regular feature ranking players or skills somehow, probably tied into reader scores sent in. Directory is next. Spend your money wisely. Read our ratings. This is probably a list of games, with their review scores from previous issues, helpful if you were trying to decide what to buy. Finally, back issues and subscriptions at the bottom, with a little picture of the magazine itself. Looks like the issue with Zelda, Majora's Mask on the cover. Always good to know how to get hold of older mags if you miss something. And that's about it for this page. Pretty standard. Club 64 fare really. This page of the magazine is the mailbox section, typical stuff for these mags back in the day, letters from readers. The star letter is a bit of a laugh, someone's written a song called American Pie, but about Shigeru Miyamoto instead, set to the tune of the Don McLean classic. Bit cheesy, but I guess Miyamoto was pretty much seen as a gaming god back then, rightly so. They even printed the lyrics, proper fan tribute stuff, geeky. Then there's a question about Digimon and Pokemon, the age-old debate. This reader spotted an advert for Digimon and wonders if it's a rip-off and if Nintendo will sue. Ed, the editor, explains Digimon is similar but made by Bandai, the Tamagotchi people. He mentions the Digimon handheld game, cartoon and cards, basically setting the scene for what Digimon was becoming, trying to ride on Pokemon's coattails really. Apparently Martin from the mag even saw Digimon games at E3. Interesting to think about that rivalry back then. Someone else is chuffed with their Zelda t-shirt but disappointed the label isn't from Hyrule, haha. Classic gamer humor. Ow. Then there's a moan about the magazine price going up. Ed justifies it by saying they need more money to keep the mag great and provide cover gifts, like stickers and books. Fair enough, magazines weren't cheap to produce, even back then. Another reader thinks Rare are being cheeky with Jet Force Gemini, saying the characters are ripped off from some kid's cartoon. Bit harsh, but Jet Force Gemini did have a slightly quirky style. Finally, the correction corner bit. They messed up the Perfect Dark review by saying Christmas Eve instead of Kitsy Eve. Whoops. Someone also pointed out a mistake in the Supercross 2000 cheat code, mentioning a PlayStation button L1 in an N64 mag major blunder. Ed admits they're clueless about PlayStations. And lastly, they got Harvest Moon in the wrong category in the directory, because it scored so well eagle-eyed readers, eh? Ed's pretty laid back about it all, typical magazine editor style, taking the flak with a bit of sarcasm. This page is a right blast from the past, looking at the letters section, mailbox, in Club 64. First up, There's a reader pondering if the characters in Jet Force Gemini, Lupus, Juno, Vela, Mizar and Callisto sound a bit familiar. Turns out they're all based on constellations and Roman gods and goddesses, which is a bit clever, innit? They're talking about Perfect Dark's Callisto NPG weapon too, saying Callisto is a moon of Jupiter. Observant little chap, this Sam Hughes fella, Raider. Then there's Keith Flint, not the legend himself sadly, but a reader who went to Crete and picked up a knockoff Pokemon toy for $5. It's a Prodigy pet, which sounds like some dodgy cash-in on the whole virtual pet craze of the time. They reckon Nintendo's lawyers might be interested in that. Next, a slightly confusing one called Something Fishy. A reader called Graham Harley reckons there's something not quite right about the magazine's coverage of wrestlers Mark and someone else playing Warzone. Apparently, they saw Mark getting his backside handed to him in the game, despite the magazine making out he's a right bruiser. Bit of magazine embellishment going on perhaps, who knows. There's a bit about Suckwater, which is actually about how to use those Burger King Pokemon water squirters properly, specifically the Kabuto one. Apparently the hole isn't for pouring water in, but for sucking it up to get a thin jet. Who knew there was so much science involved in a kid's toy? Lastly, in the Dream On section, some reader ideas for games. First is House Fighter 64, a Street Fighter-style game set in a house. Fights in different rooms, using furniture as weapons, and apparently you can verbally abuse your opponent with nasty combinations of obscenities. Sounds a bit leery. They even suggest a bread knife in the kitchen as a finishing move. Crikey, Turake. Then there's Team 64, which is basically a bad guy Team UP game. Imagine every Nintendo and Rare villain under one banner, like Lord Tragic, the Dominators, Joanna Dark, Conker, Link, Donkey Kong, Pikachu, yeah, Pikachu is there apparently, Mizar, and even Ganon. It's like a who's who of N64 nasties, all causing trouble together. Roberto Catena from Aylesbury came up with that one. Sounds a bit bonkers but kinda fun in a daft way. This page of N64 Magazine is the Mailbox Club section, full of readers' letters and questions, proper retro stuff. Someone named John Baldwin reckons the graphics are so good, they're practically heavenly typical over-the-top praise you'd get back then. Ed, the editor, just plays it cool. Then there's a bloke, Stephen Parashos Carabellas, who thinks GoldenEye is ancient history. Bit harsh, GoldenEye was still brilliant then, even if Perfect Dark was the new hotness. Ed basically tells him he's talking rubbish, fair enough. There's a funny bit about Jess Bickham being a spy, just office banter really. Someone else is asking if Misty from Pokemon has a boyfriend, and Ed's reply is, you should get out more. Classic. Then there's a weird one about Saddam Hussein and Grand Theft Auto. Ed just says, unlikely but not impossible. Random. There's a letter about blisters from playing a game. Ed calls it particularly nasty. Andrew Parrott is after advice from the cleverest people, and Ed just says, you know what to do. Cryptic. Alex Calling is just shouting about Mahjong rocks. Ed just says, ah. And someone, Gavin Lane, is worried about Dolphin being rainbow-colored with cutesy games, and suggests Fisher-Price should make it. Ed just replies, quite. Snarky as always. The Rip Them Off section is about swapping the Overton for Perfect Dark. Bit of a cheek to complain, Perfect Dark was miles better than the Overton, no offense to Psygnosis. The cartoons are funny, usual magazine humor. Then we get to, so tell me this, the question section. Anne Payne wants to know how many bit Dolphin will be. Dolphin, of course, being the code name for the GameCube. They reckon 128-bit, which was the big selling point at the time. Robert Grayson asks about face mapping in Perfect Dark, and the release date. Ed says it's unlikely due to controversy, which probably refers to the violence, and reckons it'll be out in July. Good guess, Bormo. Kim Dangerfield asks, what is Pokemon Attack? Turns out it's Pokemon Puzzle League, like Tetris Attack on the SNES, or SNES as we called it. Apparently it was delayed until December, typical Nintendo delays. J. B. Aldis wants to know about Game Boy Advance. Radiotech? No apparently. Play old Game Boy games? Yes. Backwards compatible, good move. How much? No idea on price. Cool damn price. Cool damn price. Cool damn. Robert Lee asks if Dolphin is still Dolphin, and if you can have more than 4 players. They haven't got an official name yet, still Dolphin, and reckon it might still be called Dolphin. 4-player plus, maybe more, and internet multiplayer too, which was just starting to become a thing. What about the mag when Dolphin comes out? They'll launch a new mag called Future. Same team though. Warrant E. Warrington. Finally Nick Howe is asking, where's Killer Instinct 3? Warrington it. Shame that, Killer Instinct was great, but Rare were probably busy with other stuff, like Perfect Dark and all sorts of other games. So yeah, that's the letters page in a nutshell. Loads of questions about upcoming stuff. Typical reader interaction page for a mag back then. This page is the N64 board section, or the Club 64 mailbox as they're calling it this month. It's all about reader submissions. There's a section called Dolphin Factory, which is quite fun, asking what we think Nintendo's next console, Dolphin, which we now know as the GameCube, will look like. We've got Shading Carlisle's design, which reckons the Dolphin will have a DVD drive and a sleek controller, coming in 9 colors, even controls for the DVD player. Bit optimistic about the colors, maybe. Then there's Fred Riding's saucer-like design, a pop-up lid for CDs in a mini-disc style case. Mini-disc, remember them? Satisfying mix of dark grey and chrome. Sounds fancy. And Sam Hughes from Nottingham thinks it'll be the ultimate potential Dolphin setup with internet access, keyboard, GBA link-up, light gun, and plenty more. They were really going for it back then, weren't they? Pluck. Then we've got the reader art submissions. Thomas Kinch, an 11-year-old, sent in a bright and bold creation, which looks like a load of Nintendo characters all mashed together, including Mario, Yoshi, and some N64 logos. Sin Helene Haugen from Norway has drawn Zelda and Link. Zamir Bandali from London has sent in a picture of Ash and Pikachu. Ian Ellis from Wrexham has drawn Pidgey from Pokemon. Helen Smith has emailed in some fab computer-generated pics of what look like futuristic game characters. Good effort all around. This page is all about Disney's Tarzan on the N64, giving you a how-to guide to be King of the Swingers, which is a bit cheeky. It highlights that Phil Collins won an Oscar for the songs in the movie, which is a bit of trivia, and then tries to help you enjoy the game, or at least get through it. There's a What We Said section, which is a review from issue 40, and they didn't hold back, calling it a tired old platform game, and suggesting you save your money and just watch the film instead. Ouch, they only gave it 35%, which is pretty dire, innit? Boy. The main article, Me Tarzan, is giving tips on how to play. It suggests using the analog stick instead of the D-pad for control, saying it's easier for reacting to obstacles. It also talks about chucking fruit accurately, and sneaking up on beasties to give them a taste of your dagger. Seems like a pretty standard platformer with some jungle combat. There are a couple of small screenshots showing the game in action. Looks a bit basic graphically, but it was the N64, so what do you expect? All in all, the page is trying to make the best of a game that the magazine clearly didn't rate very highly. Bit of a damage control exercise maybe. This page is all about getting the most out of Disney's Tarzan on the N64. Right then, Fruity Beauties, they're calling it, which is a bit of a silly title for a game guide, isn't it? It's basically pointing out the obvious places to find goodies like fruit, coins, letters and sketches dotted around the levels. Things like looking left after dropping off a log, checking inside hollow logs, and looking below vines. Hardly rocket science, even for back then. Then there's Jungle Japes, which is more general gameplay advice for Tarzan. They mention using a piece of flint you can find in every level as a weapon, which was handy for those pesky enemies. Using rhinos and other big animals as trampolines to reach high places is brought up too. And who didn't do that? They also mention vine swinging, and how you can control your leaps by tapping jump at different times, to find secret areas. Pretty standard platforming stuff really. And of course there's a cheat code left left right right, up up down down left right up down, and then press A on the title screen. Apparently this unlocks all levels, which was always a good shout if you were stuck. Finally they've got bonus levels listed out. There's Stork Ride, which they say is like a reverse Stampede level, racing into the screen collecting coins. Then there's Jungle Cruise, where you control your speed in a whirlpool, which they say is a bit frustrating. Tree surfing involves dodging stones thrown by birds on low-flying branches. And lastly, jungle jumping, where you grab fruit for extra time and bounce on trampolines to get high scores. So yeah, a decent little page of tips for Tarzan, a solid Disney platformer for the N64 back in the day. This page from issue 44 of Club 64, it's a how-to section, number 84 in total, and this time it's all about Disney's Tarzan on the N64. Right then, welcome to the jungle. Level 1 tips. They're suggesting using the special fruit to batter the baboons. Makes sense. No need to get too close and personal with those hairy blighters. Then there's the usual treasure hunt, with T, A, R, Z and N, pointing to coins, butterflies and bouncing on an antelope. Bit of everything really. Going ape next. Level 2. They reckon you should leap up to the first branch straight off the bat. More button prompts for vines, bird nests and smashing green patches. Nothing groundbreaking, just your standard platforming fare. Then we've got Elephant Hair Dare, sounds a bit made up if you ask me. More ground smashing and dagger action for pig creatures, and even a bit of swimming. The tips are still pointing out hidden bits in logs and near waterfalls, classic stuff. Finally, Stampede, the level where you're legging it from something big. Apparently you can't control your speed, helpful. Weaving to avoid rocks and running for a speed boost, sounds like a typical on-rails chase section. More lettered tips for logs and parrot twigs, and the sketches highlight more of these collectible locations. So yeah, Tarzan, not a bad game at the time, a bit easy maybe, but good for the younger gamers I suppose, and these tips are covering the basics of finding all the hidden bits and bobs in the early levels. This page is all about tips and tricks for Disney's Tarzan on the N64, looks like we're getting a walkthrough for levels 5 through 8. Level 5 is Coming of Age, seems to be focusing on using the rhino to get past a pit, and mentions bonus fruit and bashing red flowers. The tips are listed as Tarzan, classic move guide style. Level 6 is Sabor attacks, naturally, going up against that pesky leopard, Sabor. It says to leap over him as he charges and stab him in the back. Typical boss fight stuff. Watch out for birds in the third round though. Level 7, the baboon chase. Sounds like a right pain. It's all about jumping over baboons and twigs, warning about breaks in the track, and using button B on the slidey section. Sounds frantic. Level 8, rocking the boat, looks like a crate puzzle on a boat. It's telling you to look behind a ladder in the bottom left corner, and mentions levers and ropes, typical platforming puzzle to get to the exit. Each level also has sketches, little numbered points to summarize the strategy. Standard stuff for a guide back then, you'd be flipping through this trying to get past those tricky bits. Tarzan was alright, visually it was impressive for the time, but a bit on the easier side if I remember right. This page is all about Donkey Kong 64 secrets right then, how to see things you shouldn't in Donkey Kong 64, classic N64 Magazine stuff, digging out all the hidden bits and bobs. They're talking about simian secrets discovered by N64 readers, cheeky monkeys. There's a section called What We Said, reminding everyone they gave Donkey Kong 64 a stonking 93% in issue 36. Incredibly, Rare have bettered Banjo, they said, which was high praise back then. Banjo-Kazooie was top tier. Weeks of play wrapped up in one impressive package, that's how they saw it. Oh. Then there's Seen It All, asking if you found all the secrets. It's all about reader tips and glitches for Rare's plucky platformer. Sounds like they got loads of letters in after asking for secrets. They've picked the best 10 reader glitches. So, it's a guide to the hidden stuff in DK64. There are little sections on bonus endings, mentioning the standard endgame tour and a secret dolphin-based ending if you collect everything 201 golden bananas apparently. Mad. Minigame menu is about Snide's blueprints. Apparently collecting all 30 blueprints lets you play loads of bonus minigames in Snide's hidey holes. Always something else to collect in those Rare games, wasn't there? And finally, Dirt Mounds. This one's about those little dirt hills in Donkey Kong 64 levels. If you got the Banana Fairy's camera, you stand on top of one, hold B and do a spin, the dirt disappears, and you get a rainbow coin. Who knew? Always something new to find, even after you thought you'd seen it all. Good old Donkey Kong 64. This page is all about the top 10 glitches in Donkey Kong 64, those cheeky little exploits we used to find back in the day. Right then, let's have a look. First up is the drop cam, which is a bit of a laugh, letting you have a look around as you plummet from a height, taking no damage when you land. Classic. Then there's how to enter any level, by using Chunky or Lanky to punch B. Locker out of the way, bit of a cheat if you're stuck I suppose. Crystal Cheat is next, using Donkey Kong's bongos in that hut to get to Trough and Scoff without bananas. Handy if you're short on the yellow stuff. Big Ape All Over uses the infinite crystal coconuts cheat to get Chunky into the Jungle Jape's beehive, and explore areas he shouldn't be in yet. Always fun breaking the game a bit. Orange Crosshairs is a simple one for changing your crosshairs when throwing oranges. Makes things a bit different I guess if you're bored. Parrot Show, using Diddy to charge through the wall outside Funky's shop, and getting back to Jungle Japes with parrots. Sounds a bit pointless but why not? Water Pistol is a glitch with Lanky and the grape gun, letting you stay in first-person view when swimming with it out. Bit odd. Hidden Hideaway is using Chunky's barrel on DK Isle to get under the waterfall, find a computer room and see Chunky disappear. Intriguing. Chunky Cheat is using Chunky to swim slowly into the Fairy Island entrance, and clip through to the Fairy Queen's room. Must save some time. Lastly, Noises Off mentions the kooky sound effects in the water, pausing and saving to hear the wobble-wobbly noise from Donkey Kong or the tag barrel. A bit of a weird one to end on, but I guess someone found it interesting. EA. They've got some screenshots dotted around showing off some of these glitches. Overall, a fun little page looking at ways to mess around in Donkey Kong 64, brought back some memories of trying these things out. The next page here is all about cheat codes and tips, proper stuff for getting ahead in games back in the day. Kicking off with Ridge Racer, 64, which was a decent racer on the N64, not as slick as the arcade but still fun. They're banging on about unlocking different cars. First up is a Gallagher 88 minigame, if you can believe it, in a racing game. Apparently you need to finish Ridge Racer Extreme Extra in first place and shoot down all 40 aliens. Sounds a bit bonkers, but those were the days. Then there's the Caddy car. You just need to race on the first track in Grand Prix mode and turn directly around at the start. Easy peasy. The Puka car needs a bit more effort, time attack mode, stage 7 or 8, and breaking the record. Bit more involved, that one. They mention the Blinky Ghost car is already unlocked, so no effort needed there. And the Crazy Canuck car attack mode, stage 8 in mirror mode, defeat the car. Bit of a weird name for a car, Crazy Canuck, very strange. There's also a car preview trick with the C buttons, and motion blurring during replays. Finally, there's a reverse 360 power slide technique. Sounds like a fancy way to drift around corners without losing speed. All pretty standard stuff for getting the most out of Ridge Racer 64. Then on to WWF WrestleMania 2000. Everyone was mad for wrestling games back then. They've got some tips for this as well. Smoking Gun Belt, for completing Road to WrestleMania with Stone Cold Steve Austin classic. Blur effect in Create a Wrestler mode, holding right C while previewing moves. Manager assistance, if your wrestler is first to enter the ring, you can hold top C, bottom C and Z on controller 4 to get your manager involved if you've got a pal to control them. Sneaky. Stealing your opponent's special move and taunt. A bit of button bashing with the grapple and analog stick, nothing too complex. And you can even play as the managers by plugging a controller into slot 3 or 4, and holding Z at the start of a match. Madness! All the usual wrestling game secrets and extras you'd expect. Good times. This page is all about cheat codes and tips, classic N64 Magazine fodder. In it, we've got Mystical Ninja 2 getting some love, with tips for infinite lives, items, double coins, the usual stuff you expect. Remember Kid Ying? Mad game that was, bonkers humor. Then it moves on to Rainbow Six. There are loads of cheat codes listed in tables for different difficulty levels, recruit and veteran, across a bunch of levels. Rainbow Six, that was the serious shooter, wasn't it? A bit different to Mystical Ninja. Lastly, there's a classic tip for Turok, Dinosaur Hunter. Blimey, Turok, that's going back a bit. Apparently it still stands up, despite the fog. They've listed a load of cheat codes for that as well, like Robin's Cheat, unlimited ammo, all weapons, spirits mode, infinite lives, disco mode, and more. Good times. This page is all about readers' top tips, cheats and quirky things for N64 games. It's called Readers' Top 15 Tips, and it's the cheat of the month. Looks like the best tipster wins a Macopad, which were alright for the time. A bit like a third-party controller. UT. Number 1 is a cheat for Tony Hawk skateboarding. Apparently, if you do some button presses at the pause menu, a girl's picture pops up. Bit of a weird one, but those were the days. Always finding odd things in games. Tip number 2 is for SCARS, which is that pretty average futuristic racing game. The tip is to enter WLLVDD as a password to unlock everything. Easy peasy. Worry. Shadows of the Empire is number 3, a Star Wars game. It's about taking on an AT-ST on foot, telling you to run around it and shoot it from behind. Basic stuff really, but helpful for younger players maybe. Tune. Rainbow Six gets 2 tips, numbers 4 and 9, showing how popular that was at the time. One is about throwing all your grenades and flashbangs at once, and the other for invincibility using button combos with the Z and R triggers. Standard cheat code hunting really. Pokemon Stadium is at number 5, showing you how to move Pokemon between the Game Boy game and the N64 game through the GB Tower. Remember all that faff? Trading Pokemon was a big deal back then. Prestia. Mission Impossible is number 6, and it's a bit of a daft tip about making the helicopter crash on the rooftop level. Sounds more like a glitch than a tip. Turok. Rage Wars gets a mention at number 7, for infinite ammo by using the minigun's B mode. Turok games were always about big guns and dinosaurs, good fun in their day. Warink. South Park Rally, remember that kart racer? Tip number 8 is to shoot Chicken Lover 5 times with Chef. South Park games were always a bit crude, weren't they? Targa. Zelda 64, or Ocarina of Time as most people call it, is number 11. It says to leave the forest temple after getting the fairy bow. Not really a tip, is it? More like just playing the game. Maybe there's something more to it that's missed. Igatele. FIFA 99 has a tip at number 12, for scoring bicycle kicks. Tap R and bottom C, and then R plus right C. Button bashing football games, those were the days. 0x is number 13, a racing game, telling you to press loads of buttons to get to every car and cup. More cheat codes basically. Foray. WWF WrestleMania 2000 at number 14. It's about changing the wrestler's music and video to DXs for the Road Dogg and X-Pac, and then dressing Chaz up like Thrasher from the Headbangers tag team, and his name changes to Mosh. Bit of a deep dive, that one, for wrestling fans. Cheshire. Finally, number 15 is IS-98, International Superstar Soccer, about scoring curling goals in football. Sounds like exploiting the game's AI a bit. Purely. At the bottom there's a form to send in your own tips, asking for name, address, postcode, game name and tip, and instructions to send it to N64 Magazine in Bath. Proper old school, cutting out the form and sending it in the post. Times have changed. This page is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, a regular feature in N64 Magazine back in the day. It's a gaming advice column, like a problem page, but for your Nintendo 64 woes. We've got a chap called Adam from Peterborough, complaining about the running man in Zelda Ocarina of Time. He can't beat him, classic struggle in that game. Dr. Kit's is being a bit sarcastic, suggesting counseling. Ha! Good one, Doc. Then there's Steven asking about Jabba the Hutt in Donkey Kong 64, trying to find a secret somewhere near Snide's HQ. Dr. Kit's gives him a clue about a large rock and K. Rool's castle. Donkey Kong 64. Massive game that. Finding all the secrets was a proper task. Warrior 4. Next up is Matthew asking about the J-bomb in Donkey Kong 64. Dr. Kit's talks about a trick with the Ramdozer and a statue. Sounds like a bit of a hidden gem to get that powerful weapon. J-bombs were brilliant for clearing out the Kremlings. Asim is stuck in Mario 64, Star 6 on Bobomb Battlefield, behind Chain Chomp's gate. Everyone remembers getting stuck on that star. Dr. Kit's tells him to stomp on the stake after Chain Chomp isn't looking. Simple when you know how, eh? Casse. Finally, Matthew from Surrey is after the second battle crown in Donkey Kong 64 on DK Island. Dr. Kit's just says there are two, which isn't that helpful, to be honest. Maybe he should have been more specific. DK Island. There are screenshots from Donkey Kong 64 and Mario 64 to illustrate the problems. Overall, it's a typical Dr. Kit's page, answering readers' questions with a bit of humor and helpful tips for some of the big N64 titles. Brings back memories trying to figure out these games back then. Before the internet was really widespread for game help, you had to rely on mags like this. This page is all about game challenges, 8 of them to be precise, to test out your N64 skills. Bit of fun for the readers, I suppose. Right at the top it says 8 challenges to test the best. They're calling it Game On for this feature. Lazawala. First up is Super Smash Bros. Dance Yoshi. Seems James Ridgway in New Barnet sent this one in. You gotta play in training mode, choose Ness, and put the computer as Yoshi on Yoshi's level. The challenge is to hit Yoshi with your electric yo-yo as many times as you can while standing still. They've given scores for hits. 20 hits gets you a gold medal, 12 a silver, and 5 a bronze. Simple enough. Next is Donkey Kong 64 with Royal Rumble, sent in by Robert Bartley from Bexley. This one's a multiplayer challenge. Everyone picks a Kong and goes into the Crusher Arena. It's basically last Kong standing. Whoever falls out of the ring loses a life. Last one left wins a gold medal. Fair enough, classic multiplayer fun. Yeah. Then we've got Jet Force Gemini, Shoot the Rabbit. James Warner from Wanganui came up with this. Multiplayer again, with 4 players on the Rith Essa stage. Weapons on medium. 3 players are snipers, and one's the rabbit. Rabbit gets 2 lives, and the snipers have to, well, shoot the rabbit. Rabbit's gotta stay on the platform in the center. Gold medal if you last more than 5 seconds as the rabbit. Sounds a bit daft but could be a laugh. Mew. Finally, for the challenges, it's GoldenEye 007 and Dead or Alive. Jonathan Belton and David Lewis from King's Lynn cooked this one up. 4 players in the bunker level with proximity mines. 1 player is the helicopter pilot, and he's Robocop with extra life. He's the police, arresting anyone shooting or holding a gun and putting them in jail. The others are on negative health, and they can either be peaceful, or try to rescue their mate from jail, or kill Robocop. You get points for escaping jail or killing Robocop. Gold for 3 escapes or kills, silver for 2, and bronze for 1. That actually sounds quite inventive for GoldenEye, I'll give them that. Underneath each game challenge they've got these medal things, gold, silver and bronze, showing what score you need for each medal. Simple and clear layout. Overall a bit of light-hearted fun for the readers. Nothing too serious, just some daft challenges to try with your mates on the N64. Suits the magazine really. This page is all about Club 64 challenges, right? Bit of fun to test yourself on some N64 classics. First up we've got WWF WrestleMania 2000, and it's called Pile On! Sounds like a laugh. It's a 4-player bash, where one poor sod is lying on the mat getting pounded by the others. The challenge is about how many pounces you can get in. Gold medal is 6 pounces, silver is 4, and bronze is a measly 2. Good for a bit of button bashing with your mates after school, wasn't it? Why? Next we've got Mystical Ninja 64, with Marathon Man. Now that's a game with some proper character. This challenge is a Zelda-style trek through the game, heading to Ghost Toy Castle. You're using Goemon at the end and you've got to get there quick without taking any damage. Timing is everything here. Gold is 11 minutes, silver 12, and bronze is 13 minutes. Mystical Ninja was a bit different back then, wasn't it? Bit quirky, but good fun. Waresho. Then it's Mario 64 with Somersault Over Oblivion. Classic Mario 64, eh? This one's in Lethal Lava Land, and it's all about somersaulting over the lava. You've got to do as many side somersaults as you can without falling in. Gold is 20 somersaults, silver is 15, and bronze is 10. Mario 64, what a game, still holds up today. Finally, South Park Rally with cow games. South Park Rally, bit of a weird one, wasn't it? This challenge is like football but with cows. You're playing as cartman, setting up the cows, and you got to score 5 goals to get gold. Silver is 3 goals, and bronze is just 1 goal. South Park Rally, definitely not one of the N64's finest moments gameplay-wise, but it had its moments if you were a fan of the show, I suppose. Right at the bottom there's a bit saying, now it's your turn, game on. They're asking for readers to send in their own challenges for games, and they're especially keen on challenges for Perfect Dark, Winback, Jet Force Gemini, and Donkey Kong 64. Fancy getting a pin badge if they print your idea. They wanted you to write in to Game On, N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12BW if you had any good ideas. Those were the days, sending stuff in by post. Good times. This page is an article called Mind Your Language. It's all about the localization of N64 games for different countries. Remember back then you'd boot up your new cart and often get that language selection screen, English, Francais or Deutsch. And that's just the tip of the iceberg apparently. Mark Green's the author, and he's talking about how much work goes into making sure games work across the globe. It's not just translating text, it's about navigating different laws, customs and cultures when exporting games to places like America, Europe and Australia. He mentions that entire teams are employed to make sure Sweden gets Link's Adventure in Zelda, and Germany doesn't ban GoldenEye for being too violent, which was always a worry back then, especially with German censorship being quite strict. There's a little screenshot at the bottom from Carmageddon 64, with a note about how the German version had no blood in it because of their laws. Seems like a bit of a pain for the developers, all this localization stuff, but I guess it's why we could all enjoy these games no matter where we were. It's interesting to think about now, all the effort that went on behind the scenes to get these games to us. This page is about the interesting world of game localization back in the day, specifically for the N64, and Babel Media, who are the guys sorting it all out. It's called All Around the World, and it talks about the obstacles they faced getting games ready for different countries. Apparently, they were based on the South Coast, and played games in loads of languages, checking for errors and glitches, a proper multilingual testing facility they called it. Their N64 roster included games like Glover, Carmageddon 64, and even Pong on the Game Boy, plus a bunch of Pokemon titles. Yay. The article gets into the nitty-gritty of censorship. Carmageddon 64 is mentioned. That game caused a right fuss, didn't it? The PC version was banned in Germany, and Babel had to change the pedestrians into zombies for the German release. But even zombies were a bit too much for the German distributors, so they ended up as dinosaurs with green blood. Madness, really. They even joke about how dinosaurs being extinct meant they couldn't actually be killed, so it was all fine. And then for the sequel, they turned the mutant humans into aliens from outer space, just to keep the Germans happy. It also mentions that after Quake 2, a PD ban was expected in Germany. Bit extreme, wasn't it? There's a section on naked flesh. Oh yes, nudity in games, always a hot topic. Apparently in France, their more liberal stance on the ladies meant a character in a third-person adventure game was confronted by a woman in her birthday suit. The publisher decided against it for the UK, and the artist had to spray paint a bra onto her intimate bits, as they delicately put it. Fancy that? Then there's Media Furores, saying Babel didn't intentionally cause controversy, but SCI's Carmageddon certainly got a lot of publicity for the splat the pedestrians aspect. Well yeah, who'd have thought? Warrant? There's a bit about age ratings too. Germany had a double-pronged rating system, with the USK ratings, and the BPJS, which aimed to protect kids from harmful publications. If a game was put on the index, it could only be advertised and sold to over 18s. So Quake 2 was likely to end up on there. And in the corner, there's a POK World section, talking about Pokemon names in different languages. Did you know Pikachu's name is recognized worldwide? They say to try saying Clefairy to someone from Germany, and they'll probably shout Piepi back. There's a list of Pokemon names. Clefairy Piepi in Japanese, Piepi in German, and Melofy in French. Weezing, Matadorgasu, Japanese. Smogmog, German. Smogogo, French. Golbat, Gorubato, Japanese. Golbat, German. Nosferatu, French. Venonat, Kompan, Japanese. Bluzuk, German. Mimitos, French. Psyduck, Kodaku, Japanese. Enten, German. Psykokwak, French. Butterfree, Batafuri, Japanese. Smetbo, German. Papalusion, French. And Mew, Mew, Japanese. Mew, German. Mew, French. Interesting to see how they change, some are quite different. Finally, at the bottom there's a picture of the frantic offices of Babel Media, and it asks, how many Pokemon can you spot in this photograph? Looks like a standard office scene. Nothing jumping out at me. Pokemon-wise though, maybe they're hidden somewhere. This page delves into the murky world of game localization, and some of the absolute howlers that can occur when translating games for different countries, especially for the Germans who are apparently quite strict about certain things. Right off the bat, they're talking about Pokemon, specifically ensuring the text on the Game Boy game matches the actual real-life trading cards. Consistency is key, you know? Apparently, they've got to be careful even about swastikas in games, as some developer nearly put them on planes in a flight simulator, which would have landed them in properly hot water over in Germany. Instant ban. They mention publishers trying to sneak violent games out in Germany before the censors get their hands on them. Bit cheeky that. Even Pokemon isn't safe from the censor's pen, having to change red blood to green, or covering up any naughty bits, mind you. I don't remember seeing any naughty bits in Pokemon. Eek. Then there's a section dedicated to translation blunders, and these are proper rib ticklers. Back problems, where the back button on menus gets translated to refer to your backside, always a classic. In Italy, a game helpline somehow got translated to a torture service, bit of a harsh welcome for gamers needing help. There's a story about someone called Jerry Merriment where the translators didn't clock that Jerry was slang for German soldiers in WW2, and translated it as that. Bit of a historical blunder there. God Botherer is about some strange Italian prayer that ended up in a game, and Ball Control highlights the perils of pluralizing ball in Italian, and making it sound rather rude. There are some screenshots dotted around, a couple of Pokemon ones on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, looks like Magnemite and Pikachu are having a scrap. There's a Wargame screenshot, could be cannon fodder maybe, Joanna Dark's character profile from Perfect Dark, and a shot of Glover too. Brings back memories, it does. This page kicks off with an interview titled, Turning Japanese, with Dan Owlson from Nintendo of America. Apparently, he's the bloke who translated most of Link's adventures into English for the N64, SNES, and Game Boy. They've tracked him down to chat about Nintendo, Shigsy, and Majora's Mask. It starts with the interviewer asking if it's disappointing to know Zelda stories in advance, given he translates them. Dan says he hasn't properly played a Zelda game since Adventure of Link on the NES, and hopes someone else does Majora's Mask so he can experience it fresh like everyone else, which is fair enough, I suppose. There's talk about working with Shigsy, who Dan describes as a creative genius, and really cares about giving players value for their money. He mentions Shigsy's attention to detail, and how he took care of Dan during his trips to Japan. They discuss how Japanese translates, and Hiro Yamada, another chap, explains the nuances and subtleties behind the text. They go back and forth to make sure the English is right, as Zelda messages are apparently deliberately vague to keep players guessing. There's a bit about Nintendo's translation tools, which apparently aren't always helpful, especially the old SNES Zelda one. Dan mentions a rubbish old keyboard, based on the NES disk system, which sounds like a right pain. Long hours are mentioned, 9 AM to 11 PM, fueled by coffee, Coke and energy drinks. Sounds like typical game dev crunch time really, even back then. Japanese humor translation is apparently tricky, and sometimes they have to make things up, to make it funny in English. The example given is the camp carpenters from Ocarina of Time, and how hard their dialogue was. Creativity is apparently limited, as they are reined in by the developers, who want players to use their imagination. This leads to internet speculation, which Dan reckons is exactly what Zelda's creators want. Kriya. Kia-way. Kriya. Then there's a question about cut characters or set pieces from Zelda. Dan can't remember any deleted outright, but thinks some missing characters from Ocarina will pop up in Majora's Mask. Intriguing if you were waiting for Majora's Mask at the time. Hatter. Finally, the most challenging thing was apparently translating Ocarina of Time during a North Korea missile test. Bit dramatic, but he was in Japan at the time, so I guess it might have been a bit worrying. Luckily, they finished the game without the world ending. Yay. There are a few screenshots scattered about. 2 look like they are from a classic top-down Zelda, maybe Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, showing some typical dungeon crawling. And there's one from Ocarina of Time showing Link fighting a Lizalfos, a proper N64 3D shot to show off the tech at the time. There are also caption boxes under some of these screenshots, with comments from Dan about translation. Like one where he says even simple phrases are a struggle, and another where he says Zelda IV, Link to the Past, had a flawless translation. And there's one saying Dan is a personal friend of Shigsy, and lucky for it, which is a bit tongue-in-cheek. This page screams, coming soon, doesn't it? It's all about Eternal Darkness, which back then was a big deal, proper mature title for the N64, which was a bit of a rarity on Nintendo's machine. They're saying it's going to be massive, with 13 playable characters and gameplay spanning over 2,000 years, which sounded pretty epic at the time, didn't it? Below that, they've trailed some reviews. Pokémon Snap, which was alright for a bit of a novelty, Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards, another Kirby platformer, nothing too groundbreaking there, and F1 Racing Championship, probably aiming for the Gran Turismo crowd on PlayStation, though let's be honest, it probably wasn't going to set the world alight. Standard N64 Magazine cover vibes, hyping up the next big thing and teasing a few reviews to get you to buy it. This page is issue 44 of Planet 64, Blimey, time flies. Right then, so the main headline screams, Tipped! Perfect Dark, promising even more levels smashed in their Perfect Dark Tips section. They are really milking that one, aren't they? Boar! Looks like they've got latest shots of Banjo-Tooie, ISS Millennium, and Mario Tennis lined up, alongside a few others. There's The World Is Not Enough, game based on the Bond film, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and Dinosaur Planet. Dinosaur Planet eventually became Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube. Funny how that worked out. Tool. On the right they're plugging the usual stuff. Skill Club Millennium, tons of new tips and cheats, special investigations, Dolphin News, that's the GameCube, codename Dolphin, for anyone not in the know, and of course, the only reviews you can trust. Cheeky. Then there's a plus section banging on about the Game Boy Companion, with every game reviewed, importing guides, and plenty of Pokemon. Always gotta have Pokemon, don't you? Next month looks like Planet Game Boy will be featured, with previews of Game Boy games, and mentions of reviewed games Warlocked and Perfect Dark, plus Pokemon Yellow and Martian Alert getting the Tip-Ed treatment. This issue is out on Thursday the 3rd of August. Right then, on to the next page. This page in issue 44 of N64 Magazine seems to be diving deep into the world of Perfect Dark. It's laid out like some kind of evidence board, you see, all corkboard and bits of paper pinned up. There's an interview transcript, supposedly from the Chicago PD, dated June 2023, which is obviously in the future from when this mag was published back in 2000. It's with a bloke called Carrington and some Officer Woods about Joanna Dark. Turns out Carrington is her boss, and admits she's a bit of a ruthless agent, doing whatever it takes for her missions. He even hints at her being some kind of dark woman involved with intergalactic spacecraft. Bit dramatic, even for Perfect Dark. Surrounding the interview are these Polaroid snaps, labeled with codes like X3, over 1E and so on. They're all grim pictures of what look like dead bodies, in various locations. Classic Joanna Dark aftermath, I suppose. Right in the middle is a wanted poster for Joanna Dark. Lists her crimes as 2,131 counts of murder, 7,301 of grievous bodily harm, illegal data retrieval, and even jaywalking. They really are throwing the book at her. Tells you to call 911 or a fictional Chicago PD number if you see her. Probably best to keep your distance if she's racking up those kinds of numbers. Book at her. Below that are some bug transcripts, bits of overheard dialogue, clearly related to the game and missions, snippets of guards and characters talking. Adds to the whole investigative feel of the page, I guess. Over on the right, randomly stuck on, there's a bill from Chicago Cab Auto Guidance. Looks like they're chasing someone for a massive debt of over $1.5 million. Turns out it's for a taxi, Cabno T31, which was apparently blown to smithereens back in July. The costs are broken down, including a huge amount for life assurance for passenger, DOA. Someone didn't have a good day in that cab then. Signed off by a Wilfredo Grizzly, accounts director. Bit of a strange thing to include on a page about Perfect Dark, but maybe it's some in-joke relating to mission costs or something. It all builds up the gritty, espionage vibe of Perfect Dark, for sure.